A huge beam of lightning hit the ground, devastating everything around it. This power came from a man known as the Fist King, who had mastered Jiangyu with his own hands. He was so famous for this title that few remembered his real name. This was Dan Wuzing, the great fighter, who now faced a complicated situation. With a shocked look, he reacted to something terrible that had just happened. In his arms, he held the body of one of his seriously wounded comrades. The hero believed he had been caught off guard in an ambush by a mysterious group. Now he found himself alone in the middle of a desolate battlefield. Looking around, he noticed the bodies of his enemies scattered across the ground. However, on a nearby cliff, only 2 opponents were left standing. He saw that both seemed very skilled and wondered where they had come from. Even though he was exhausted, the warrior stared at the two with unwavering determination. He then decided to return their subordinate by throwing the body in their direction. The man on the cliff begged for help from the sword demon, his leader. However, the sword demon ignored the plea and struck down his own companion. Dan Wuzing was completely shocked to witness such cruelty. The enemy had eliminated his own ally without the slightest hesitation. At this point, the protagonist realized that the opponent fought dirty. The symbol on the man's sword, combined with his merciless actions, caught Wuzing's attention. Putting the pieces together, the King of Fists finally began to recognize the foe's identity. He questioned whether the 2 enemies belonged to the demonic faction. The enemy seemed impressed and acknowledged that he was standing before the King of Fists. He praised the hero's resistance, but Wuzing sharply told him to be quiet. Burning with anger, he declared that he would defeat the enemy with just 10 blows. The sword demon found such confidence arrogant and charged forward, eager to test the extent of that arrogance. Wuzing, however, managed to defend himself, countering the attacks with his electric fists. The opponent was surprised, unprepared for such speed. At that moment, Wuzing landed a punch and began his count from 1. With a confident gaze, he prepared for the second blow and unleashed a hail of punches until the count reached 6. Then, something strange happened. His attacks began missing the weak points. Looking up, he realized the woman had tied him with purple energy wires. Enraged, he wondered when the villain's accomplice had managed to do that. Taking advantage of the distraction, the sword demon retrieved his weapon. In the next instant, he pierced Wuzing's chest. Seriously injured, the warrior suffered massive damage from the attack. The swordsman coldly declared that the reign of the King of Fists ended there. With a look of triumph, he stared down at his nearly powerless opponent. But Wuzing surprised him, grabbing the blade with his bare hand. Alarm spread across the enemy's face as the fighter released one final burst of energy. The sword demon watched the scene unfold with a satisfied smile. He then approached the fallen body and praised the Fist King's skill. The explosion left behind a massive crater and a path of destruction. The woman joined her partner and commented that the situation had been extremely dangerous. The villain bent down to mock the warrior in his final moments. But Wuzing summoned his last strength to deliver one final punch to the enemy's face. With that, he completed his 10th blow, leaving the enemy in complete shock. The hero felt his life slipping away and accepted that his reign as the King of Fists had come to an end. In his final thoughts, he regretted one thing he couldn't do. He had wanted to strike the enemy one more time before his journey ended. And so, Dan Wuzing, the King of Fists, was defeated by the demonic faction. Meanwhile, in a safe house on Joa Mountain, something strange was taking place. A mysterious crow watched a young woman inside one of the rooms. Suddenly, someone inside woke up, frightened and disoriented. The young girl ran over in a panic to check on her master. She asked again about his condition, while the man looked around, confused, wondering where he was. He glanced down at his body and questioned whether anyone had tended to his wounds. The man touched his head and looked confused about his current situation. He realized that he had no injuries, and the girl addressed him as Young Master. He accepted the water, but found the title of First Young Master strange. When he looked in the mirror, he saw an unfamiliar face staring back and wondered why he was being called that. Holding the cup, he examined his new hands and noticed how different they appeared. Suddenly, he was startled by his own reflection and jumped back. In a panic, he desperately tried to remove what he believed was a mask from his face. But as he touched his skin, he found no seams and understood that it was truly his face. He stood in shock, while the girl silently watched, unable to make sense of his reaction. Seeing his distress, She quickly said she would call a doctor. Left alone, the fighter continued staring at his hands, still unable to accept what was happening. The girl walked away, confused by how strangely her master was behaving. He began to think through the situation and concluded that not even the demonic faction could have done something like this. Looking at his reflection again, he questioned who the person in the mirror really was and decided he needed to investigate the truth. Attempting to test the new body's movements, he tried to stand but stumbled and nearly fell, unfamiliar with how it moved. He grumbled that the body was too weak, comparing it to a baby deer. Frustrated, he slumped into a chair and called the new body complete trash. At that moment, his attention was drawn to some papers on the table that mentioned a group of merchants. He recognized the name of the large Inhum merchant group. As he read through the documents, he noticed they were addressed to someone named Li Jin. It became clear that the body he now inhabited belonged to Li Jin-un, the eldest son of the household. Scanning the letters, he saw that the requests were mostly about money, gambling, and women. From this, he concluded that the former owner of the body had been a complete failure. He ruled out witchcraft or the use of a mask, and he felt no strange energy within the body. The pieces began to fall into place, and he started to suspect he had been reincarnated. Sitting at the table, he began to wonder if he had completely lost his mind. Just then, a loud call for the first young master echoed through the room. His personal doctor rushed in, asking if he was all right. The hero felt uneasy and wondered who the man was. The doctor explained that he had heard something was wrong. Seizing the moment, the doctor grabbed the young master's wrist to check his pulse. The warrior replied that everything was fine and there was no reason to worry. The doctor was relieved and said he had prepared the usual meal. When the dish was brought out, the hero recognized it immediately as refreshing chicken soup. He knew the soup was good for healthy people, but would be harmful to the body he now possessed. He recalled how the old man had checked his pulse and found it odd that he looked so healthy. The doctor cheerfully claimed that the soup would make him as strong as the young men participating in the upcoming martial arts competition. Curious, the hero asked about the competition and was shocked to learn that 200 years had passed. Processing this information, he refused the soup, claiming he had no appetite. He then sent the doctor away, saying he wanted to return to sleep. Thinking to himself, he calculated that if the competition was nearing its 200th edition, then it hadn't been long since his death. That realization brought him some relief. He concluded that the demonic faction likely still existed. He also began to suspect the doctor and others around him, convinced they were people who deserved a beating. With fierce determination in his eyes, he silently vowed revenge. This time, he would finish all of them with a single punch. Later, a table full of appetizing food was set before him. The servants whispered among themselves, surprised by how much the young master was eating now, so unlike before. The hero returned from a walk looking much healthier than before. Entering the room, he complimented the girls for preparing the meal and requested that meals remain simple like this from now on. The servants continued to whisper, amazed at the change in him. While he was eating, Dr. Gong Sunming called to him from outside. The hero felt annoyed by the interruption, but allowed the man to enter. The old doctor came in with a grim expression while the servants bowed politely. The hero found the doctor's attitude amusing, noting how rude he was despite his formal entrance. But then the doctor's face suddenly shifted into a forced smile as he greeted the young master with enthusiasm. Wu Xing didn't understand the sudden change in behavior and decided to trap the doctor. He calmly asked what the doctor wanted. The older man stood there, speechless. The gentleman said he had come out of loneliness and remarked that his effort had been in vain, since the young master appeared healthy. With an ironic smile, the protagonist questioned what kind of effort he was referring to. He then asked if that effort had been an attempt to poison him with the soup. The doctor stood in shock, unable to believe what he had just heard. He tried to defend himself, insisting that the soup was a nutritious tonic. But the hero continued provoking him, saying he thought it was poison meant for someone in his condition. The doctor grew furious and reminded the young man that he was his personal physician. Realizing he was no longer welcome, the gentleman turned to leave the room. However, the warrior suddenly called him by name, making the doctor visibly nervous. With an intimidating gaze, he asked who the true master of the house was. The doctor cringed, recognizing that he had crossed the line with his earlier behavior. Then the hero broke the tension with a laugh and said it was just a joke. After that, he asked the doctor to bring the writing tools. Once ready, he ordered the man to write a letter as he dictated the words. The first line stated that he would stay in the village due to his illness. But when the warrior continued dictating, the doctor stopped writing and scowled. The hero noticed the hesitation and asked why he had stopped. The doctor tried to cover it up and replied with feigned confusion, asking what the young master meant. Suddenly, a small gold bar flew through the air and slammed into the wall, narrowly grazing the doctor's neck and leaving him terrified. With a serious expression, the hero warned him that he was no longer the same Lee Jin-un from the past. The doctor, alarmed, asked what the young master meant by that. The boy began to explain everything, starting with the dragon phoenix soup. He said that for healthy people, the dish could serve as an invigorating tonic. But for someone sick like him, it was practically poison. The warrior insisted that a real physician should have known this. The doctor stood still, quietly analyzing the situation. Then the hero asked whether he had thought the pulse check would go unnoticed. The doctor was even more stunned by that revelation. But the protagonist added that the most important part had yet to come. With no appetite, he ordered everyone to leave the room and take the tonic with them. Looking directly at the doctor, he stated that the man hadn't even managed to hide his intentions. The older gentleman stood glaring at him while holding the bowl of tonic. Knowing the doctor wasn't working alone, the hero told him to write down the name of his boss. The man feigned ignorance, asking how anyone could suspect such a kind soul. The protagonist let out a sigh, exhausted by the doctor's pathetic act. Then the doctor's face twisted, revealing his true nature. With a malicious glint in his eyes, he glared at the hero, who calmly questioned him. The hero declared that the man had finally revealed his true self, and that it had been foolish to even try to appear worthy. At that moment, the villain threatened to eliminate all the servants to silence them forever. He slipped a needle from his sleeve and prepared to attack. But in the blink of an eye, the young master appeared right in front of him. With a swift, accurate strike, the protagonist punched the doctor in the face. Holding a piece of chicken, he warned a man not to get distracted. Then he took a bite from the chicken and added that the doctor shouldn't have let his guard down. Wincing slightly, he muttered about the pain and complained that the body was still far too weak. Determined, the warrior decided he needed to regain his strength as quickly as possible. Once he did, it wouldn't matter if the mastermind behind it all was the Yunha group. He also planned to investigate Gongsun Meng further in the future. But suddenly, the young master's body began to weaken, and he nearly collapsed. A sharp headache struck him, and he wondered what was happening. A familiar voice cried out desperately, calling for its lord. The image of the doctor flashed in his mind as the voice shouted his name. The hero began to deny what he was seeing, confused by the vivid images. He soon realized that he was experiencing the memories of the real Lee Jin-un. The memories were so sorrowful that a tear ran down his face. At that moment, the warrior finally understood the entire story of the boy whose body he now inhabited. Lee Jin-un was the eldest son of the wealthy Inha merchant group, but he was neither as smart as his second brother nor as strong as his third. He was simply the eldest, a young man without many special talents. To compensate for his shortcomings, he relied on money and immersed himself in a life of pleasure. By the time he realized his mistakes and tried to change, it was already too late. His health had been neglected for far too long. Lee Jin-un came from a small family, which is why he was sent to live in an exile village where no one cared much about him. The warrior thought the real problem at the beginning had been not having the body's memories. But now, with everything cleared up, he could finally focus on his martial arts. He regretted the waste of such a naturally gifted body, but he planned to use his own knowledge to make up for it. Then he paused, struck by a realization. His eyes fell on a pile of coins, and he remembered the elixirs he needed. The former owner of the body had been extremely wealthy and could buy anything he wanted. Thinking of this, the boy remembered the doctor he had defeated and decided that he needed to bury the man. A year passed, and the landscape around the village had completely changed. One day, someone approached the place with firm, determined steps. A man wearing an eye patch greeted the servants, who were surprised by the visit. Introducing himself as Mokinsep, he asked to see young master Lee Jin-un. One of the girls pointed the way with a smile. The guard was completely shocked by the scene in front of him. He could hardly recognize the young master, whose physique had changed drastically. The boy now had a muscular, well-defined body thanks to his intense training. Several seasons had passed since the warrior had begun dedicating himself to growth. During this time, He had manifested his energy core and mastered the arts of survival, including the art of mobility, body art, and the quick step. He had also mastered the 10-phase lightning art, which allowed him to control lightning itself. The hero reflected on how smoothly his training had gone so far. To test his new skills, he performed an impressive acrobatic move. At that moment, a solitary leaf floated down in front of him. Without even moving, it was sliced perfectly in half, a clear sign of how far he had come. Despite all this progress, the warrior still felt that it wasn't enough. Then a voice called his name, breaking his concentration. He turned to see the visitor. The guard introduced himself again as ManhwaCapped, saying it had been a long time since they had seen each other. He handed over a letter from a main clan. Without speaking, the boy extended his hand. ManhwaCapped was shocked and wondered where the weak, fragile young man had gone. As he handed over the letter, he complained that his arm hurt under the young master's grip. The hero simply stared at him in silence. Moments later, the two sat together as the warrior carefully read the letter. It revealed that his father had suddenly collapsed and was now bedridden. The boy noticed the message lacked any clear explanation for the cause of his father's illness. When he asked about it, the guard hesitated before revealing the truth. He explained that the Aoyang clan was responsible, blaming them for absurd protection fees. The hero asked if the Aoyang clan had done anything to justify the tax increases. The guard angrily replied that they had not, calling the other clan dogs. He added that the Little Divinity sect had also tried to impose outrageous taxes. According to him, the Aoyang clan had refused to help and done absolutely nothing in return. Even the captain of the guard had been unable to protest to Aoyang Hu. The hero recognized the name, recalling that Aoyang Hu was a powerful and well-known figure. With a confident smile, the boy asked if the situation would be resolved by dealing with the Aoyang clan. The guard was shocked and admitted there was another reason behind the patriarch's collapse. He revealed that the second and third brothers had drawn swords and fought in front of their father. The protagonist asked if the old man had fainted from rage, and the guard confirmed it. The warrior could hardly believe that his own brothers had fought so recklessly before their father. But he quickly decided that he could no longer sit back and observe. He stood up firmly and handed the letter back, telling the messenger to keep it. With a composed, determined posture, the young master declared that he would personally take care of all family matters. ManhwaCapped was stunned by the complete change in his lord's demeanor. Back at the clan, the guard excitedly reported that Li Jin-un had become a perfect martial artist. But another man, overhearing the story, burst into laughter. With a mocking grin, he scoffed at the idea of the useless Li Jin-un becoming a martial artist. Laughing loudly, he said that if that were true, he himself must be a legendary master. Another nearby man told him to stop joking and try to be a bit more convincing. But deep inside, Han Yip seemed thoughtful as he considered the possibility that the story was true. As the vice captain of the guard squad, he began to wonder if Jin-un had truly recovered his health. He remembered that the young master had always possessed a good physique since childhood. He then asked the guard when the heir planned to return to the clan. Just then, the guard interrupted him and announced that the young master had arrived at that very moment. Han Yip told the others to stop complaining, reminding them that he was the one who fed them and that they should move quickly. Finally returning home, the hero stood before the imposing headquarters of the Inha merchant group. He was stunned by the grandeur of the estate, thinking to himself how insane it all seemed. The warrior realized that the body's former owner had been even wealthier than he had imagined. He dismissed his servants and said he would go see his father immediately. As he walked alone through the property, he began to reflect. It struck him as odd that no one had come to greet him upon his return. That's when he sensed the presence of several people hiding nearby. Suddenly, numerous guards emerged and surrounded him with swords drawn. They congratulated him on his safe return with an intimidating tone. The man at the front introduced himself as Han Yip, the vice captain of the guard squad. Smiling, the vice captain remarked how unrecognizable the young master had become. He expressed relief at seeing him healthy. Another guard whispered a reminder that the old Jin-un used to look down on and mistreat them. Despite these memories, Han Yip maintained a calm and neutral expression. The guard expected his captain to be humiliated again, but the hero stepped forward confidently. With a smooth motion, with an ironic smile, he thanked everyone for the enthusiastic welcome. The guards were stunned, and Han Yip quickly offered to escort him to his father. Everyone watched in disbelief, unable to comprehend how the once useless young master was now greeting them with such poise. Moke and Sep reaffirmed that his master had changed, while another guard admitted it felt like they were meeting a stranger. From a distance, Han Yeep watched the young master closely, his expression thoughtful and curious. He gave a small smile, mentally noting how the boy now seemed more like an ally than ever before. Upon arriving at the door, the vice captain paused to speak. He informed the protagonist that the clan leader had already been notified of his arrival. The warrior nodded and thanked him. His younger brother suddenly appeared behind him. With a casual, mocking attitude, the younger one couldn't resist taunting. He called attention to the scene with a sarcastic remark, clearly trying to stir trouble. Both the guard captain and the protagonist turned to look at him. The younger brother then stepped closer, placing a hand on his older brother's shoulder. His touch wasn't friendly. It was filled with arrogance, meant to provoke. With a smug expression on his face, he insulted the protagonist by throwing out an old nickname, mocking him as the perverted Jin Ian, a label meant to belittle and shame. Without stopping, the younger brother continued his verbal jabs. He made fun of the protagonist's facial expression, claiming it looked like he had completely changed and even had the nerve to glare now, something he found laughable. As he spoke, he pressed down harder on the protagonist's shoulder, trying to assert dominance. The guard captain, observing the tension, became nervous. He thought to himself that this was going to get ugly again, just when the protagonist had returned. Trying to defuse the situation, the captain stepped in and gently removed the younger brother's hand from the protagonist's shoulder. He attempted to lighten the mood, joking that the two brothers were finally reunited after such a long time and must be overjoyed to see each other. But the younger brother didn't take it well. He slapped the captain across the face without hesitation, annoyed and offended. With a sharp glare, he demanded to know how the captain dared to touch him without permission. Watching this, the protagonist began to feel irritated. Meanwhile, the younger brother wasn't finished. With a threatening glare, he looked between the captain and his older brother and snarled that dealing with one worthless fool was already bad enough. But now even the vice captain seemed to be disrespecting him. The protagonist didn't respond. He stayed calm, simply looking back at his younger brother. But that only fueled the younger one's arrogance. He pushed further, asking if he should teach the protagonist a lesson so intense that he'd never even dare to meet his gaze again. Just then, something shifted. The protagonist gently raised his hand and rested it on his brother's cheek. He softly called his name, Ja Ian. Annoyed by the gesture, Ja Ian tried to respond with more venom. But before he could finish speaking, the protagonist suddenly slapped him hard across the face. Ja Ian fell to the ground, shocked. He looked up in disbelief, demanding to know what the hell had just happened. But the protagonist ignored his outburst. Instead, he crouched down, placed a firm hand on Ja Ian's shoulder, and gripped it tightly. As pain shot through him, Ja Ian cried out, overwhelmed by the sudden shift in power. The protagonist calmly confessed that he had been excited on his way here, perhaps even looking forward to this moment. As the grip tightened further, Ja Ian, in pain and rage, cursed and shouted, calling his brother a completely insane bastard. Outside, the sounds of the scuffle echoed through the corridors of the large estate. A man wearing glasses appeared, confused by the noise. This was Liu Eun, the second son. He asked what was going on, and Han Yeep quickly explained the fight between the brothers. Liu immediately assumed that the third brother had been harassing the eldest again. He shouted at the guards, demanding to know why they hadn't stopped the fight sooner. But the protagonist turned to his younger brother and told him to be quiet. They were standing in front of their father's room. Just then, a weak voice called out Liu's name from within the room. What Wyan and the others saw next left them stunned. Outside their father's room, Wang stood calmly, holding their eldest brother in place. Yan was struggling, but Wang had completely subdued him without breaking a sweat. From within the room, a voice called out to Wyan, but he couldn't respond. His mind was still reeling from the sight of Wang's dominance. Nothing about what he was seeing matched what he had expected. The scene shifted to a more composed setting. A quiet room awaited with a steaming teapot on the table, its gentle heat contrasting the underlying tension in the air. Hyan now sat at the head of the table, silent and observant. Wang stood beside a kneeling and restrained Yan, his expression calm and confident, wearing a faint, knowing smile. Hyan took a sip of tea and casually remarked on Wang's return, noting that he appeared to be in good health. He paid no attention to Yan's condition. Wang confirmed that he was indeed well, meeting Hyan's gaze with steady confidence. The overseer then raised his bandaged hand, pointing it out and questioning whether Wang had caused the injury. Before Hyan could explain or wave it off, Wang turned toward Hyan again and landed a sharp, calculated strike across his face. Hyan was forced to endure the pain in silence, completely powerless under Wang's authority. Wang then issued a cold warning to Hyan about the consequences of disrespect. Hyan, shaken and bruised, quickly accepted his position, though his mind was in turmoil. He couldn't understand how his older brother, once weak and pathetic, had overpowered him so easily. A brief memory surfaced in Hyan's mind, a flashback to when things were the opposite. Back then, he was the one who tormented Wang, who was then known as Jin Ian. But now, the roles had completely reversed. Hyan, watching quietly, understood what had happened. Wang had truly humbled the arrogant third brother. Curious, Hyan pressed Wang for details about this transformation. Wang answered calmly, clearly proud of how far he'd come. As Wang glanced around the room, his eyes landed on a stack of scrolls sitting on the table. Hyan explained that they were the employee lists for an upcoming conference. But Wang was already reaching for them, picking one up and unrolling it with deliberate motion. He scanned the list, letting his finger glide down the names until a realization hit him. A smirk spread across his face. All the key guards had been recommended by the same individual, someone from the Iang clan. The pattern was too precise to be a coincidence. Without waiting, Wang turned to his brothers, his voice taking on a tone of sharp accusation. He directly asked if either of them had ties to the Iang clan. Hyan was too stunned to reply, and Hyan immediately panicked, denying everything in a frantic voice. Both brothers reacted with disbelief, protesting the accusation and calling it absurd. They insisted that they were loyal, that they'd never betray the family or their father's business. They swore to protect everything, no matter the cost. Wang took their responses in stride, clearly satisfied. With a cool remark, he noted that their loyalty had saved him the effort of dealing with them further. He then shifted focus to the upcoming conference, confirming with Hyan that all the high-ranking officials would be present. Once Hyan affirmed it, Wang made his own announcement. He would be attending the meeting himself. Then, without waiting for questions or objections, he turned to leave, stating plainly that he was going to see their father. His calm authority left his brothers speechless. As Wang exited, Hyan broke the silence. He demanded to know what had happened back at the safe house, unable to make sense of Wang's new power. Hyan, overwhelmed with frustration, completely lost his composure. He screamed in anger, tormented by regret over a past decision that now haunted him deeply. Meanwhile, Wang arrived at his father's quarters. A voice from within gave him permission to enter. Inside, the atmosphere was dim and heavy. Wang approached the bedside of Liang Min, the head of the Yuna merchant group, who looked weak and frail. His father acknowledged his presence quietly, then asked about the noise from earlier. Wang dismissed it with a calm reassurance, downplaying the situation. Instead, he brought up his father's health, which Liang Min attributed to the weight of stress and pressure. As Liang Min looked into Wang's eyes, he studied his son's face closely. The changes were undeniable. There was strength and confidence where there had once been hesitation. For a moment, the old man questioned whether the person standing before him was truly his son at all. Despite the lingering suspicion in his eyes, Liang Min looked genuinely pleased to see Wang standing strong and healthy. It was an expression of warmth that Wang hadn't anticipated. In fact, it caught him off guard. The contrast between what he had expected and what he received was too stark to ignore. As the moment lingered, a memory surfaced within Wang, a haunting fragment of his former life. He remembered the cold, distant world he had come from. Back then, he was an orphan, untouched by a father's love, shaped by hardship and emotional isolation. The concept of paternal affection was foreign to him. It wasn't part of his reality. Yet Jinian's memories, those belonging to the original son, painted a different picture. The bond between this father and son had once been rich with connection, though now aged and strained. Wang looked down at the frail hand resting in his own. There was a softness to the moment as he gently gripped it, his expression deep and contemplative. His father, once a towering figure of strength and command, now lay worn and diminished, consumed by illness. It stirred something strange inside Wang, something he wasn't used to. He tightened his hold slightly, not out of force, but out of something more conflicted. A mix of unfamiliar emotions swirled in him. Then, he quietly reassured his father, speaking of lightening his burden. He hinted at a solution to his father's overwhelming stress, and though his tone remained composed, a sinister glint danced in his eyes. Liang Min furrowed his brow at the cryptic remark, his instincts sensing something unsettling. But Wang dismissed his concern with a warm, disarming smile, carefully veiling his true thoughts. Still, the old man couldn't shake the unease creeping over him. His son was different, there was no denying it now. The next day, the Yunna Merchant Group's conference commenced. The room was filled with tension and ambition, none more apparent than an Yang, who arrived with his usual smugness. He took his seat with a self-satisfied grin, immediately surrounded by his loyal men. When one of them spotted Wang sitting confidently in attendance, he whispered the news to his leader. Yang's brow lifted ever so slightly at the sight, a calculating look overtaking his face. Wang, however, sat unfazed, composed, commanding. He didn't flinch at the whispers or the puzzled glances from the other members, who were clearly unsettled by his unexpected presence. To them, he was still the once weak son, and his attendance at such a high-level meeting didn't make sense. Yang scoffed inwardly, writing Wang off as a desperate man clawing at relevance. He viewed the appearance as nothing more than a weak attempt to gain favor, a last-ditch effort to remain standing in a game far bigger than him. Meanwhile, Han took charge at the front of the room, trying to carry the meeting forward. He asked if there were any objections to the current topic on the table. Just as he was about to move on, a hand went up. Bold, unexpected, it was Yang. With calculated confidence, Yang took the opportunity to speak, offering what he claimed was the perfect candidate to serve as Wang's personal guard. The move was transparently political, another attempt by the Yang clan to extend their influence deeper into the group. Murmurs of discontent rippled through the room. Some of the members grumbled openly, clearly frustrated by Yang's relentless power grabs. One member was so startled by the brazenness of the suggestion that he crushed the teacup in his hand. Embarrassed, he quickly blamed it on a slip, though it was obvious the tension had gotten to him. Yang offered a fake apology, feigning politeness, but his eyes betrayed him. He was enjoying every second of the discomfort in the room. He then challenged the assembly, daring anyone to oppose his nomination. The room went quiet. He smirked, clearly expecting no one to answer. But just as he began to bask in the silence, a single voice broke through. Across the room, Wang raised his hand. All eyes snapped to him. With unshakable confidence, he calmly stated that he had objections to the current proceedings. Then, rising from his seat, he locked eyes with Yang and made his own proposal, direct and explosive. He called for the dismissal of Arian Ho, the current guard squad leader. The room exploded into chaos. Yang's supporters burst into laughter, mocking the proposal as pure nonsense. One of them openly jeered, treating the idea as if it were a poorly timed joke. Yang himself laughed dryly, questioning whether Wang had lost his mind. He sneered at the idea, taunting Wang for forgetting his place. To Yang, Wang had no power, no right, and certainly no authority to make such declarations. Wang didn't respond to Yang's mocking tone with words. He simply smiled. His expression alone was enough to shake the air, daring Yang to keep talking. In a blink, Wang channeled a surge of raw energy into his fist. Without warning, he lunged forward, slamming his knuckles into the ground. The entire floor erupted beneath him, a violent explosion of debris and force that shook the room to its core. As dust and stone rained down, Wang stood tall in the center of the destruction, staring down at his completely stunned rival. Yang could barely breathe, his eyes wide with disbelief as sweat dripped from his forehead. The sheer power Wang had just displayed left him paralyzed. With an icy gaze and clenched fists, Wang made a bold declaration. The Yunha Merchant Group belonged to him now. He turned his back on the room and began walking away, the silence behind him heavy and stunned. Hyan, still in shock, called out, questioning the recklessness of Wang's challenge. But Wang didn't stop. Instead, he turned slightly and called back to Hyan, asking what happens when a martial artist is underestimated. A smirk played on his lips, sharp and knowing. He answered his own question. The one making assumptions gets devoured. Then, he gestured toward the gathered crowd, directing Hyan's attention to something more urgent. Their merchant group, Wang pointed out, was already rotting from within. Ayang's people were everywhere. Wyan followed his gaze, his eyes widening in alarm as he finally noticed the sheer number of Ayang clan members surrounding them. Wang stepped closer and firmly gripped his brother's shoulder. He told him not to worry. As the older brother, he'd handle everything. Hyan was left speechless, trying to grasp what Wang meant by handling it. His brother's methods were unpredictable, chaotic even. The scene flashed back to the wreckage. Amid the dust and shattered floor, Wyan's thoughts spun. He demanded to know what Wang's violent display meant. Now, armed men were closing in, surrounding Wang. A few of Ayang's subordinates sneered, assuming the so-called troublemaker had finally lost control. But before they could act, one of Wang's loyal guards stepped forward, furious. He placed himself between Wang and the attackers, declaring their actions a disgrace. Drawing weapons on the young master was beyond insolence. In moments, Wang's personal guards formed a defensive line. Despite being outnumbered, their resolve was unshakable. Wang stood at the center, cold and still. With a quiet voice, he agreed their enemies were out of line, lifting his head with open contempt. The air grew thick as Wang stared into their eyes, questioning how they could dare threaten their own employer. Even his own guards were caught off guard by the intensity of their master's presence. Wang calmly commented that his enemies must have a death wish. From a distance, Ayang observed everything unfold. He casually offered compensation to the opposing guard captain, a thinly veiled bribe. But Wang met his gaze with a smirk. He said he wasn't sorry for the chaos, only for utterly ruining Ayang's plans. Then his voice sharpened. He revealed the truth. During his recovery, Ayang had hired a physician, an assassin, meant to kill him. But the plan had failed. Wang went further. He exposed Ayang's entire strategy, how he had manipulated the brothers from the shadows, hoping to fracture them. With the siblings turned against each other, the Ayang clan would have seized control of the merchant group like puppeteers pulling strings. The revelation struck like a thunderclap, but Ayang didn't flinch. He erupted into derisive laughter, brushing off the accusation as delusion. Wang took a step forward, his presence heavier than ever. He was just getting started. With a calm but piercing voice, he dropped the final bombshell. The assassin sent to eliminate him had already been dealt with by his own hand. The room fell silent again. Ayang reached out in disbelief. He looked him in the eye and calmly confirmed it. He had swiftly eliminated the assassin. Wang stood calmly. He openly mocked his rival, pointing out the glaring flaws in his clumsy, half-formed takeover attempt. His words stung, and Ayang's composure finally cracked under the weight of humiliation. Fueled by fury, Ayang gathered a surge of energy into his fist. The air around him crackled as raw power coiled in his arm, and he stepped forward with murderous intent. But Wang didn't flinch. He simply watched the incoming blow with a knowing smirk. This was exactly what he wanted. Ayang lunged, unleashing a savage, energy-infused punch aimed directly at Wang. In response, Wang summoned his own vibrant blue energy, meeting the attack head-on. The two fists collided with a thunderous explosion of light and force, sending shockwaves through the conference chamber. Ayang was thrown backward, pain surging through his arm as it trembled from the impact. He stared at Wang in disbelief, the realization dawning. Wang had mastered a formidable martial art. The sheer force of the exchange left no room for doubt. His own guards, witnessing this display, stood frozen. None of them had known the depth of their master's strength. Wang tilted his head with a playful smirk and casually asked if it was really okay to hit someone fresh out of recovery. Then, with a mocking chuckle, he added that if the duel was official, then surely everything was fair game. Ayang's face twisted with rage as he sensed his rival's confidence bleeding into every word. Seeing their captain challenged so brazenly, Ayang's men quickly jumped in, shouting to declare the battle an official duel, with the entire room as witnesses. The guard captain grinned, thinking Wang had been cornered by the formal terms. But Wang simply adjusted his robes with calm precision, shaking his head. He rejected the offer flatly. He wanted none of their rules. Instead, he raised his fist and demanded a life-or-death duel, no constraints. Ayang's expression shifted. He begrudgingly acknowledged Wang's advanced skills, assuming the strength came from training under some prestigious sect. Without another word, he rushed in, declaring that Wang's inexperience would be his downfall. But the moment Ayang's leg came flying, Wong moved with elegant precision, effortlessly parrying the kick. He smirked and mocked his opponent, questioning what exactly counted as experience in his eyes. Ayang's disbelief deepened as Wong stood there, crackling with lightning, dismissing the lecture on experience entirely. Then, with a sudden motion, Wong fired a devastating counterattack. Ayang's body was launched across the room, a blur of limbs as he crashed into the ground, completely overpowered. Blood stained his lips as Ayang struggled to process what just happened. Wong approached, his smirk deepening, now ready to deliver a true lesson in combat. Activating his enlightened mobility art, Wong distorted the space around him, blinking forward at impossible speed. In an instant, he was in front of Ayang. Ayang barely had time to raise his sword before Wong's hand caught it mid-swing. Sparks exploded as flesh met steel, but Wong didn't budge. With one swift motion, he deflected the blade entirely, forcing Ayang backward. His boots carved trenches into the ground as he fought to stay upright. The duel intensified. Blow after blow, the two clashed in a blur of strikes, each movement laced with lethal precision. But Ayang was slipping. He barely managed to block the next strike, and in that instant, he understood something was terribly wrong. The way Wong moved, the timing, the power, the footwork, none of it aligned with a novice. It wasn't just raw strength. It was technique refined through brutal mastery. Ayang suddenly felt as though he were facing not a young upstart, but a seasoned martial grandmaster. Unwilling to accept the truth, Ayang pushed down the fear rising inside him. With a snarl, he summoned his energy once more, readying a desperate counterattack. His men, watching anxiously from the sidelines, erupted in cheers. They were certain their captain was about to unleash his finishing move. Ayang gathered every ounce of strength he had left, channeling it into his most powerful technique. The three-form sword Arc's pride burned hotter than ever. The thought of being defeated by someone he considered a mere brat was unbearable. With fury coursing through him, he lunged forward, unleashing a rapid, energy-infused sword strike meant to end the duel once and for all. But in the blink of an eye, Wong vanished from his sight. Ayang's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't track him. Before he could even turn, Wong reappeared behind him, glowing fist already poised. With a chilling calm, Wong delivered a final, devastating blow. Ayang's face twisted in agony as the force slammed into him. His body was lifted off the ground, sent flying backward like a ragdoll, crashing into the floor with bone-rattling impact. Silence fell across the battlefield. Onlookers stood frozen, eyes wide with disbelief. No one had expected the once-dismissed Wong to hold such overwhelming power. One of Ayang's men rushed forward, horrified by the captain's condition. Meanwhile, far from the chaos, the scene shifted to a peaceful room overlooking a serene landscape. Inside, a tenant respectfully offered a drink to an older man, possibly Liang Min, the merchant group's head. The old man paused, his eyes narrowing slightly as he absorbed the news of the duel. Hands clasped in front of him, he reflected quietly, the weight of realization settling on him. Something about his son, Wong, had become undeniably clear. Back at the battlefield, Wong stood tall over his defeated opponent. His expression remained calm and resolute. Ayang lay broken on the ground, his body limp and battered from a single, decisive blow. His subordinates swarmed to him in panic, shouting in desperation. One of the men glared up at Wong in disbelief, but Wong met the gaze coldly and asked if he too wanted to share his captain's fate. The man hesitated, then swallowed his anger. Cradling his injured leader, he grudgingly acknowledged that the duel had been fair and free from interference. But then his voice turned low and threatening. He warned Wong that this victory came at a steep price. The Ayang clan would not forget this humiliation. They would drag the Yuna merchant group into endless revenge and political sabotage through every deceptive means available. Wong remained unmoved. He replied without hesitation that he had never expected a life without conflict. This path was his choice. He laid out his code simply. Kindness would be returned in kind, and grudges would be paid back equally. He made it clear that this duel and everything that followed was his personal responsibility, not the merchant group's. That declaration sent a chill through his brother, who cried out in alarm, realizing the danger Wong had just chosen to face alone. But Wong was unwavering. He announced with full conviction that the Yuna merchant group belonged to him now. Recalling his father's gentle smile, he spoke of the group not only as a business, but as a legacy entrusted to him, a responsibility he would protect no matter what. He honored the loyal guards who had stood by him even when he was treated as a discarded heir. He spoke of the humble servants who had cared for him without hesitation. For them, and for everything the merchant group stood for, he vowed that it would never again be manipulated by men like Yang. His voice turned cold. He stared directly at the intruders and ordered them to leave. They were all fired. Silence fell once again as Wang's brother and remaining companions stood dumbfounded by the sheer force of his declaration. The Yang clan members returned his glare, fury blazing in their eyes, but they said nothing. With clenched jaws and bitter hearts, they turned and began their retreat. One among them, quieter than the rest, offered a rare and sincere farewell, wishing Wang well in the days ahead. Now alone in the chamber, Wang faced the people who had witnessed everything. The battle was over. He stood not just as a victor, but as the new, undisputed leader of the Yuna merchant group. His brother, still trying to process it all, stared blankly at the destruction and the man at its center. One of Wang's loyal guards suddenly burst into cheers, elated, but his friend quickly clamped a hand over his mouth. Their commander turned sharply toward them, scolding their lack of restraint, though his expression betrayed something else, a rare mix of pride and relief. Wang's attention shifted to the chief administrator, who flinched slightly as he was suddenly addressed. With a commanding gesture, he demanded an elixir, requesting that it be taken from the merchant group's funds. After all, if he was going to shoulder this mountain of responsibility, the least he deserved was a tonic to help him recover. The administrator lit up with enthusiasm, bowing deeply. He promised to retrieve the finest tonic available, nothing less for the new leader of the Yuna merchant group. Wang, standing firm as the new head of the Yuna merchant group, begins assigning responsibilities with sharp precision. He outlines the administrator's new duties, emphasizing the urgent need to hire a completely new guard squad. His tone leaves no room for negotiation. The old system is being torn down. The scene then shifts to a peaceful estate bathed in the golden hues of sunset. Inside, a relaxed man sits comfortably between two imposing figures, sipping tea. As Wang speaks, he mentions already having candidates in mind. The man seated with him arches a brow, asking for confirmation, brings up the name Leginian. The man's interest sharpens immediately. The narrative flashes back to a few days prior, on Leginian's very first day at the merchant group. Night has fallen, and Leginian walks calmly through the estate grounds, accompanied by his subordinate. His eyes are sharp, scanning every detail around him with a measured, thoughtful gaze. As they pass the vice captain, Leginian casually asks if the man has had a meal yet. The surprised officer admits he's been working non-stop since sunrise, with no time to eat. Leginian doesn't respond immediately. He simply files the information away with a knowing look. A sly grin creeps across his face, hinting at the gears already turning in his mind. He then turns his gaze downward from a balcony, watching a cluster of guards fooling around while on duty. The contrast is obvious. Where the vice captain was dutiful and focused, these men were lazy and indifferent. Leginian quietly unclenches his fist. He's already made up his mind. These freeloaders need to go. But he also knows the harder part isn't firing them. The real challenge is replacing them with people who are actually worth something. His subordinate, watching the changes in his expression, finally begins to understand just how large and calculated Leginian's plan truly is. Their search leads them to a bustling, lantern-lit establishment filled with smoke, noise, and laughter, a den for gamblers, drinkers, and rough types. Exactly the sort of men Leginian is looking for. Inside, one especially loud man enjoys a smoke, completely oblivious to the eyes watching him. Some patrons recognize Leginian instantly. They snicker among themselves, calling him the merchant group's famous pushover. Their tones are mocking, but Leginian doesn't flinch. He stands with his hands clasped calmly behind his back, surveying the room like a general analyzing a battlefield. He turns, gaze sharp and predatory, and begins walking toward a roped-off area marked restricted. A large bouncer, armed with a trident, stands in front of a set of ornate double doors. The bouncer smirks at his approach, mockingly greeting him as young master, expecting yet another bribe or groveling favor. But Li Jinian's expression turns cold. He dismisses the man's familiarity and commands him to open the door. The bouncer, caught off guard, sputters in disbelief as Li Jinian brushes past him without hesitation. His firm stride signals a dramatic shift. This is not the same man they once knew. Inside the private room, the rowdy atmosphere quiets as the occupants notice Li Jinian's entrance. Their leader, Como, greets him with a smug grin. But when his eyes meet Li Jinian's, he senses something is different. Li Jinian stares back with icy resolve. Two bald men, Yuk Jimbo and Yakiongo, offer a cold, dismissive welcome. Como scolds them with mock concern, scolding their lack of hospitality and putting on an exaggerated show of care for his old friend. He forces a laugh, acting as though they all share a warm bond. A flashback surfaces. A younger Li Jinian appears, visibly distressed, while a teenage Como stands above him with cruel authority. The memory is bitter. Their friendship had always been one-sided. Como used him, mocked him, and took advantage of his family name and resources. Back in the present, Li Jinian studies their faces in silence. He watches the lies play out, pondering what they even think friendship means. Como then tosses him a bag of coins with a smug grin, telling him to have fun, his tone dripping with condescension. He laughs about finally having his favorite pushover back, promising a big treat, all at Li Jinian's expense. But this time, Li Jinian doesn't play along. His silence unnerves Como. The room grows tense. Como frowns, uncomfortable with the uncharacteristic lack of response. But Li Jinian breaks the quiet in a chilling tone, stating he's simply deep in thought. His gaze narrows. With calm menace, he admits he's contemplating whether or not to end Como's life right then and there. Internally, Li Jinian clarifies his true target. It's not Como, not directly. His real concern is the twin brothers beside him. They're the true muscle behind Como's operation. From the way they carry themselves, Li Jinian understands they're little more than hired fists. Thugs living in Como's shadow, loyal only to his coin. Li Jinian studied the two enforcers closely, picturing them in their element, brutal, efficient, and unquestioning in their loyalty. They were clearly skilled men, but he couldn't help thinking their talents were utterly wasted under someone like Como. While their leader reaped all the benefits, these brothers did the dirty work, little more than tools in the hands of a man who had no true respect for them. Having reached a firm conclusion, Li Jinian finally acknowledged Como's repeated questioning. He turned to him with a radiant, confident smile and extended his hand. His first demand, the vault key. Como and his henchmen stared blankly, completely thrown off by the sudden and unexpected request. The gang leader scoffed at the absurdity of it, waving it off like a joke and assuming this was just another round of begging for pocket change. But Li Jinian nodded calmly, replying that cash would suffice for now. With chilling precision, he began listing out every single coin they had extorted from him over the years: forced investments, rigged games, even exaggerated medical bills. As he reached the end of his calculations, he concluded the total debt, 100,000 Niang. He then paused, tilting his head slightly, wondering aloud if perhaps he was being too lenient. Como barely held back a laugh. He covered his mouth as his shoulders shook, trying not to burst outright. But soon enough, he erupted in hysterical laughter, slapping the table in disbelief. To him, this was pure comedy. Through tears of laughter, he mockingly praised Li Jinian's sudden mastery of mathematics. Still chuckling, he leaned forward and sneered, calling Li Jinian a complete madman. His tone shifted. Como now spoke with dark amusement, boasting that the vault didn't just contain money. It held a fortune in jewels and precious metals. He took a deliberate step closer, amusement giving way to menace. He got in Li Jinian's face and growled that none of it was meant for him. With a sneer, he offered Li Jinian a patronizing loan, mockingly asking where all this vault talk was coming from. Li Jinian remained stoically silent. Annoyed, Como grabbed his chin, trying to provoke a reaction. Still, Li Jinian did not flinch. His silence only agitated the gang leader further. Como's expression twisted in frustration. His voice rose to a furious snarl as he demanded to know why Li Jinian was ignoring him. Spit flying, he ranted about the complete transformation, from a weak, fragile patient to someone who dared scowl at him. Then, completely losing his composure, he grabbed Li Jinian and shouted, trying to remind him of his place. But Li Jinian stayed calm, exhaling slowly. His poise remained untouched, even as Como tightened his grip and barked threats at him. Finally fed up with the lack of response, Como shouted for his henchmen to put him back in his place. One of the bald twins stepped forward without hesitation and slammed Li Jinian's head onto the table, expecting an immediate submission. But something fell off. As he held him down, a bead of sweat began to trickle down the enforcer's face. Li Jinian wasn't reacting, not even flinching. He wasn't resisting, but he also wasn't yielding. A smirk spread across Li Jinian's lips. He muttered that he had tried to show them kindness. Then, in one swift and explosive motion, he shattered the enforcer's grip and flipped the large man clean over his shoulder, slamming him hard into the ground. The room erupted into stunned silence. But before he could react, Li Jinian was already moving. He pivoted and sprang forward with incredible speed, using the table as a springboard. With perfect aim, he launched a devastating kick straight into the second brother's midsection. The blow landed hard, utterly destroying his guard and sending him hurtling across the room. Li Jinian landed gracefully, casting a glance over his shoulder, faintly surprised at how smoothly it had all gone. The first twin groaned and pushed himself to his hands and knees. The second staggered back to his feet, refusing to stay down. Li Jinian observed them quietly. He noted the swelling wrists, the awkward stance. They were clearly injured. But even through the pain, neither showed an ounce of fear. Only fierce, unshakable determination. A confident smirk formed on Li Jinian's face. He recognized their spirit. They were real fighters. Ignoring their wounds, the brothers roared and launched a coordinated charge at him, moving in perfect sync. Li Jinian readied himself. In the blink of an eye, he vanished. The twins froze, their attacks swinging through empty air. They looked around, bewildered. Then, he reappeared right behind them. Before they could turn, he seized both their heads with a crushing grip, completely halting their momentum. His smile widened just slightly. Their strength was admirable, but they lacked leadership. With no hesitation, he slammed their heads together with brutal force, dropping both enforcers to the ground instantly. As their unconscious bodies hit the floor, Li Jinian issued one final, cold warning. And then silence. Only one person remained conscious in the room. Como. He stood frozen, sweat dripping down his face, too stunned to speak. He had just watched his two strongest men get dismantled with ease. Li Jinian turned his attention to him with a pleasant smile. Calm, composed, and terrifying, he addressed his dear friend, Miamo. After Li Jin finishes off the guard, he turns to face his friend. His posture is calm, but clearly implies the confrontation isn't over. He's signaling that there's only one thing left to deal with, and it's the person standing in front of him. His friend reacts with alarm, the realization hitting him that he's next. The sudden shift in power makes him nervous and panicked. Li Jin then casually rubs his hands and closes his eyes, smiling as if this situation is lighthearted. But the smile is sharp, like a predator playing with its prey. He addresses his friend directly, but the tone makes it clear this is personal. The friend responds with feigned innocence and light sarcasm. He tries to downplay the situation, almost jokingly suggesting that Li Jin should have told him about his training. It's a weak attempt to defuse the tension and pretend this is just a misunderstanding between friends. But Li Jin's expression shifts into something colder. His response is laced with quiet intensity. He's essentially telling his friend that he expected better, that someone like him should have seen this coming. It's a warning and a judgment at the same time. Meanwhile, the friend is hiding a knife behind his back. His tone shifts from nervous politeness to open desperation. He tries to halt Li Jin's approach, pretending he wants to talk things out, but internally, he's cursing the situation and gearing up for an ambush. As he launches forward, his thoughts are cocky. He still underestimates Li Jin, believing he's just a weakling pretending to be tough. He thinks a surprise attack will end things instantly. But before he can land a blow, Li Jin counters decisively. A table slams into his friend's face, followed by Li Jin smashing the table apart and grabbing him by the head. After seizing control, Li Jin calmly follows up with an electric attack. He could have killed him, but didn't. Outside the room, a guard hears the chaos and panics. He hides himself, thinking that things have escalated far beyond what's normal. The situation is dangerous, and someone could genuinely die. Back inside, Li Jin releases his friend, who drops to the floor in a daze. Li Jin sits beside him, composed but focused, as if watching a dying ember flicker. He tries to jolt his friend back to awareness, not out of concern, but control. The friend begins to laugh, not out of joy, but sheer disbelief. It's the kind of unhinged laughter that comes when someone realizes they've completely lost. He then manages to speak weakly, asking what Li Jin wants. He's confused, disoriented, and trying to understand what Li Jin's goal even is. Internally, he's overwhelmed. He starts questioning everything, wondering what Li Jin was really doing during his supposed recovery. He remembers things that suddenly make sense in hindsight, suspecting that Li Jin had been training in secret. The realization hits hard. Maybe all of this was premeditated. Maybe this beatdown wasn't just self-defense, maybe it's revenge. But he can't believe he was bad enough to deserve this. Or at least, that's what he tries to tell himself. The fear builds. He begins to truly wonder if this is the price for his past cruelty. He starts suspecting that Li Jin might have orchestrated all of this, the timing, the attack, the exposure. In an effort to shift the mood, he suddenly stands and acts overly cheerful, a complete 180 from just moments ago. His performance is clearly fake, but he hopes to divert Li Jin's attention. Instead of offering what was demanded, he suggests an alternative, anything really just to stall or misdirect. Li Jin responds with interest, but doesn't make his intentions clear. This ambiguity gives his friend a sliver of hope, which he clings to. Sensing a possible opening, the friend becomes excited. He references their long-standing relationship, appealing to nostalgia and shared history. It's a manipulative move, trying to reframe the conflict as a misunderstanding between old friends rather than consequences for betrayal. Li Jin acknowledges the sentiment in a neutral way, appearing to accept the idea of friendship, but without much emotion. His friend takes this as a good sign, becoming animated, relieved. He even celebrates the moment as a turning point, convinced that things are resolved. He suddenly pulls Li Jin into a hug, acting as if everything's forgiven. His promises to stop bullying and hitting Li Jin feel performative, like lines rehearsed by safety. Not because he means it, but Li Jin's expression doesn't change. He doesn't return the hug or acknowledge the excitement. He simply stares ahead with a flat, disinterested look and says something that makes it clear. His words suggest that the friend's touch and the entire charade disgusts him. Hearing Li Jin's cold rejection, the friend quickly lets go of him and tries to reset the mood with exaggerated optimism. He puts on a wide, glowing smile, acting as if everything's fine now. He insists that they're not just friends, but brothers. His tone is overly dramatic, clearly fake, and meant to cover his fear and shame from earlier. To solidify the performance, he turns to the two guards nearby and loudly orders them to treat Li Jin with reverence. He demands they greet Li Jin as their new big brother and show proper respect, even congratulating him on how much stronger he's become. It's his way of saving face and pretending he's still in control. The guards don't question it. They respond instantly, congratulating Li Jin in a way that's respectful but feels automatic. It's clear they recognize strength and have started to shift loyalty. Internally, however, the so-called friend smirks. His thoughts are full of contempt. He scoffs at the idea of friendship or brotherhood, clearly seeing it all as an act. Deep down, he still views Li Jin as someone who used to crawl at his feet, obedient, weak, and pathetic. In his mind, he's already planning to escape. Once he gets out of this mess, he intends to grab the twins, likely his loyal subordinates or bodyguards, and disappear. He believes that with them by his side, starting fresh somewhere else will be easy. But as he begins to walk away, Li Jin's voice cuts through the room. He calls out to the two guards by name, reminding them that when he swears brotherhood with someone, it's for life, not a passing moment. His tone is heavy, implying a deeper commitment and warning them to consider their stance carefully. The twins immediately turn to look at the friend. Their eyes are uncertain, perhaps even judgmental. They're silently questioning whether they should still trust or follow him. Feeling the pressure and not liking the attention, the friend snaps back. His voice becomes defensive, frustrated. He demands to know why they're looking at him like that, and reminds them loudly that he and Li Jin are sworn brothers now, trying to reassert authority, but it sounds desperate in response. The guards face Li Jin and declare their loyalty to him with complete seriousness. They announce that they'll now follow him as their big brother. It's an official transfer of allegiance. They're no longer under the friend's influence. Seeing the shift, The friend fakes a smile and pretends to support it. He plays along, complimenting their attitude, but there's no sincerity. Inside, he's boiling. Lee Jin then speaks again, his voice smooth and calm, suggesting everything is settled, but only on the surface. Then, suddenly his tone shifts. It grows darker, more threatening. He states that if they truly are brothers, then it's time to determine who the biggest brother is. With a quiet but unmistakable command, he tells the guards to step outside. Whatever comes next, it's going to be private and decisive. The friend is completely caught off guard. Panic flickers across his face. He tries to interrupt, pleading for a pause, but the guards are already moving. A moment later, he finds himself alone in the room with Lee Jin. Lee Jin looks at him with narrowed eyes and asks what he's trying to do. The friend, growing more uneasy, begins to question Lee Jin's motive. In his head, he's wondering, what exactly is Lee Jin after? Lee Jin gestures for him to hurry up and make a decision. This throws the friend off. His thoughts spiral. He wonders if Lee Jin isn't after money, as he originally assumed. Could there be something else? Lee Jin responds again, now openly critical. He calls out how the friend had used the guards for personal gain, manipulating their loyalty for selfish purposes. He's calling out the way the friend operated and declaring it wrong. Then, surprisingly, Lee Jin smiles brightly. The mood shifts for a moment. As he raises a fist with resolve, he declares his new intention: to properly guide those who followed the wrong leader. It's not about revenge, it's about setting things right. And this time, he's the one taking responsibility. Hearing this, the friend sighs, not from relief, but from resignation. His face falls, disappointment clouding his expression. He weakly tells Lee Jin to just take the money and be done with it. He grabs his head in frustration and despair. Emotion spills over as he bitterly complains. Lee Jin has already beaten him up, and now he's even taking the two people who were closest to him. It's too much. Then his frustration explodes. He screams that what Lee Jin's doing is no different than telling him to die, that he's being pushed to the edge. Lee Jin turns slightly, calm as ever, and repeats the word kill, as if he's considering it. And then, without another word, he kicks his friend in the face. The blow is brutal and sudden, meant not just to hurt, but to humiliate. His face shows a mocking expression, and the words that follow sound like sarcastic praise, pretending to thank him for his efforts. But it doesn't stop there. Lee Jin launches a series of punches, not even giving his opponent a moment to breathe. Each strike is fast, merciless, and unrelenting. There's no hesitation, just raw, controlled fury. The friend, now overwhelmed and terrified, thinks he might actually die. The pain, the power, the relentlessness, it all becomes too real. For the first time, he fears that Lee Jin isn't just proving a point. He might be serious. Barely able to speak, he manages to get a few words out, a plea. He says he'll hand something over, but Lee Jin only leans in with a cold, unreadable look. His face shows no pity. He says he can't hear him, forcing the broken man to repeat himself. With no pride left, the friend finally says it clearly. He'll give up the keys. He begs for mercy, asking to be spared. After Lee Jin's final mocking remark, Myungo, beaten and bruised, tried to regain some control over the situation. He asked sarcastically if he should show respect now that they were supposedly friends. But instead of responding with words, Lee Jin suddenly grabbed him and threw him hard toward the door. Myungo crashed through the door, breaking it as he tumbled outside. The two guards standing nearby saw him fall and immediately called out his name, shocked by the sight of him in that condition. Lee Jin watched him with an unreadable expression, silently wondering how Myungo still had the nerve to laugh in that state. Lying on the ground, Myungo was overwhelmed by disbelief. In his thoughts, he questioned whether Lee Jin was even sane anymore. The guards, seeing their former boss sprawled out like that, asked if he had really lost. With a weak voice, Myungo admitted defeat. He told them that from now on, they should serve Jin Eon instead. Inside, he felt deeply embarrassed but held back his emotions. Still, he tried to reason with himself. Maybe it was better for the twins to follow someone like Lee Jin, someone who could give them a better life, perhaps in a more stable place like the Alinha Merchant Guild, instead of keeping them stuck in this run-down gambling den. As he thought about it, a tear slipped from his eye. He had spent a long time with them and believed they shared a bond. But before he could dwell on that feeling, the twins spoke in unison. They said they understood, and they thanked him sincerely. Hearing that, Myungo looked at them with irritation. Later, he muttered to himself in frustration, calling them ungrateful and cursing the old saying about never trusting those with black hair. He then made his way upstairs toward his room. On the way, people in the building recognized him and started whispering. They called him the walking corpse and commented that now, without the twins, they might actually be able to beat him. He ignored the voices and kept walking, head lowered. But suddenly, a group of men stepped in front of him, surrounding him. One of them mentioned that now that the twins were gone, things had changed. Myungo looked at them calmly and acknowledged how bold they were all being now. Then he raised his voice, claiming his reputation and daring them to come at him if they were serious. One of the men mocked him, saying it was pathetic how someone in his condition still talked tough. The group raised their weapons and moved in to attack. Seeing the situation, Myungo instinctively raised his hands to protect himself. In his mind, he felt the fear set in. He really might die here. But before they could strike, someone intervened. Lee Jin suddenly appeared, fighting off the attackers as he walked through, casually carrying goods looted from Myungo's room. He made it clear that he didn't approve of these people jumping Myungo now, especially when he was already injured. He reminded them that these same people were once too scared to even look at Myungo properly, and now that he was weak, they were trying to pile on. After dealing with the attackers, Lee Jin continued walking, barely looking at Myungo as he passed by. Myungo, still lying on the ground, muttered a bitter remark, annoyed at how cool Lee Jin was acting. A short while later, he and the twin guards were walking toward the exit. One of them turned to him and quietly thanked him for helping Myungo. Then, both of them bowed respectfully and repeated their thanks. As they left to carry out Lee Jin's orders, he watched them go, thinking to himself. He recalled how many people had wondered why the twin guards stayed loyal to Chul Myungo for so long. From old memories, he remembered that some said they had been brought there and sold as slaves, while others believed they followed him purely out of fear. Even Lee Jin once thought that way. But now, looking at them with a more thoughtful gaze, he realized the truth. They hadn't been slaves, and they hadn't stayed out of fear either. As he walked on, he quietly acknowledged something else to himself. Even in this second life, understanding people's real intentions was still difficult. Unbeknownst to Lee Jin, someone was secretly watching him from behind pillar. The observer, wide-eyed in disbelief, whispered to himself. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. In his thoughts, he questioned it again. Could that really be Jineon? Sometime later, the scene shifts to Jan, who is grumbling to himself. Ever since Jin came back, there hasn't been a single peaceful day. He's clearly frustrated. Just the other day, Jin returned with a ridiculous amount of money out of nowhere and brought along 2 big guys as well. At this point, Jan has concluded that he simply doesn't like him. While in the middle of his complaining, he notices some movement. It's none other than Incup, barging into the residence, pulling a huge cart behind him. Not far behind, one is managing the goods, giving orders to the workers to handle everything carefully since they're transporting important items. Curious, Jan approaches and asks what all this is about. His mood suddenly shifts to excitement when he hears that the goods include extremely rare elixirs. One so rare, they're not even available on the market. Just then, a familiar voice draws everyone's attention. It's Jan's father, the old man, who steps out and casually mentions that he was the one who ordered them. Juan immediately urges him to stay indoors since he's not in great condition, but the old man waves it off, saying he's doing much better now. Jan and the turd both ask the old man what he plans to do with all the elixirs. The turd gets especially hopeful, assuming that since Jin only needed one, surely some of the rest must be for him too. But that little dream is crushed the moment the old man clearly states that all of it is for Jin. Still disbelieving, the turd asks again if all those precious elixirs are really just for Jin. The old man explains that one elixir alone isn't enough to change Jin's fate. He reminds them that he's already spent a fortune on the trash guards before, so this isn't a big deal in comparison. In addition, he's already sent letters to their company's regional branches, contacting old friends and respected merchants. He told them he would be buying high-quality elixirs to help the company recover from its current crisis. Since the company's collapse would affect them all, they took his words seriously. He acknowledges, though, that his biggest mistake was putting a rat in charge of the escort group. So now, he feels obligated to clean things up properly. Hannah praises the decision, saying the young leader has the potential to become a great warrior. Everyone around seems to admire Jin's effort and potential, while Jan, and especially the turd, struggle to understand what's going on. The old man laughs joyfully, clearly proud, saying this is finally his chance to spend all the money he's been saving up his whole life. Meanwhile, the turd, his hopes fully shattered, can't even speak. Sometime later, having mentally snapped, the turd is seen wildly swinging his sword like a man possessed. Earlier, he had asked his father where his elixir was, only to be met with silence. The old man had looked at him with clear dissatisfaction and questioned whether he really needed one. Now, driven mad with envy, the turd rants that he can't even breathe peacefully anymore. Everywhere he turns, it's all about Jean. He sulks and cries, convinced everyone's playing favorites and discriminating against him, wondering what sort of miracle Jean must have experienced. That's when he notices movement again. In a blur, Jean runs past him at incredible speed, barely pausing to say that he's just out for a walk. The turd gets pushed aside in the process, and as Jean disappears into the distance, he realizes something strange. Jean is dragging a huge boulder behind him. Not only that, but he has weighted shackles strapped to his legs. Despite being completely out of breath, Jean continues walking without slowing down. Watching this, the turd is left in disbelief. It finally hits him. Jean really is putting in the work. As the sun begins to set, Jan collapses onto the ground, exhausted. Despite the fading light, he grips his sword tightly and keeps swinging it, refusing to stop. He's clearly trying to imitate someone, probably Jean, and even mutters a few overly dramatic lines to himself, as if role-playing. But no matter how much effort he puts in, it's obvious his moves don't come close to what Jean had displayed earlier. That's when Jean suddenly appears, catching Jan off guard. With fear written all over his face, Jan jumps slightly and asks why Jean is back so soon. He thought he'd gone out for a walk. Jean replies bluntly, saying that if Jan is going to try and copy techniques, he should at least do it properly. He points out that Jan managed to mimic one of his own finishing moves surprisingly well, and tells him to try replicating it again using the sword. Embarrassed, Jan realizes Jean had been watching the entire time. Jan gives it another try, swinging with all his strength, but ends up breaking the training staff. Jean admits the move was powerful, but immediately follows up by critiquing the form, saying the stab was extremely sloppy. This stings Jan's pride. Just as he turns around in frustration, Jean suddenly throws a punch at him. To his own surprise, Jan manages to block it. Jean calmly says he just let his guard down on purpose, then quickly follows with a kick that sends Jan crashing to the ground. Jean explains that in that moment, Jan panicked, and that's what made him fall. Lying on the ground and convinced that Jean has lost it, Jan begs to talk things out. But Jean isn't listening. With no other option, Jan grabs his sword and charges. But just as he looks up, Jean is gone. In the next instant, Jean appears behind him. He says that when people are pushed into a corner, that's when they usually reveal their trump card. But in Jan's case, all he did was tremble. That's why Jean held back, collapsed on the ground. Jan realizes just how close he came to death. Jean, meanwhile, offers some calm advice. Stabbing attacks have a lower hit rate than slashes. He explains that Jan's technique, whatever it's called, is a one-strike move, and because of that, he had to be cautious. Jean adds that the difference in a split second of movement could decide the outcome. As he continues lecturing his brother, Jean reflects on his own strength. In his past life, he wouldn't have even let a weak escort captain draw a sword on him. His current body is still nowhere near as strong as the one he had before. Even as the renowned Fist King in his previous life, there were still people he couldn't surpass. That thought unsettles him. It's not enough. Clenching his sword tightly, he tells himself that this time, he'll become stronger than ever, stronger than anyone. Just then, one of the guards comes to inform him that someone is waiting for him outside. As Jean leaves, he flicks his brother on the forehead. Jan starts complaining, but Jean pays him no mind and walks out without another word. Meanwhile, outside, some visitors nervously exchange opinions. They're trying to convince themselves that there's no way Jean could have learned martial arts. After all, wasn't he just obsessed with girls? But one of them, Guang, says he saw something strange with his own eyes. He recalls passing by the gambling den run by Myungo while drunk and catching a glimpse of Jean. Shocked, he says that before he could process what he saw, he vomited, and by the time he looked again, Jean was gone. The others, Ju Jar Yang and Samaguk, dismiss the story, thinking he's exaggerating. But as they confidently push open Jin's room door, they all freeze. Inside, Jean stands before them, completely jacked, muscles toned, and presence overwhelming. The group immediately closes the door in disbelief. Turning to Jin's maid, they ask if this is really Jean. She confirms it, shocking them even further. Still trying to process the change, they wonder if they were just drunk the last time they saw him. But their thoughts are cut short as the door opens again. Jean stands there, expression cold. He first tells his maid to take the twin guards to the dining hall and make sure they eat to their heart's content. Then he turns to the two visitors, his gaze sharp. "What are you waiting for?" he says, stepping aside. With a heavy look, he orders them to get inside. Shaking, the two pray silently for someone, anyone, to come save them. As soon as Lee Jian laid eyes on his friends, a wave of memories from the original owner of his body surfaced. In his mind, he recalled their identities with surprising clarity. These are the self-proclaimed four heavenly kings of wine and women. A bunch of eccentric men chasing after dreams and pleasures. Sima Guk, the one from Miram Alliance, was known for his ambition, but also for his unfortunate condition, irritable bowel syndrome, and being a perpetual exam taker. Then there was the youngest heir from the West Wind escort establishment, try to make a name for himself. The other two included the infamous heir of the Yunha merchant group and another who never quite let go of reckless youth. They were all here, gathered in one place, having heard the wild rumor that their long-forgotten pushover friend had returned. A rumor so unbelievable, they had to see it with their own eyes. Later, inside a quiet room, Lee Jian sat with them, sharing drinks. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken thoughts, as everyone silently observed him. From the expressions on their faces, it was clear they were trying to figure out the man he had become. But Lee Jian, now in full awareness of his inherited memories, looked at them and thought to himself with distaste, not these fake friends again. The memories rolled in. He remembered clearly how these guys used to always be together, chatting endlessly about booze and women. They used to call themselves something ridiculous, maybe the four unruly drunken idiots, or perhaps the four total wrecks. Whatever it was, the name perfectly matched their carefree, chaotic behavior. The silence was finally broken when one of them hesitantly called out to him, asking if he was really back. Another chimed in, pointing at him and expressing concern about his well-being. Lee Jian, showing no emotion, simply replied that he was fine. That short answer was enough to throw them off. One of them began sweating nervously and awkwardly commented that he seemed more than just fine. He actually looked intense. Curiosity quickly took over. One of the friends grabbed Lee Jian's hand, staring at it in disbelief. He couldn't wrap his head around how someone like Jian could have changed so much. He asked if he had been secretly training all this time. Sima Guk, watching quietly, was more perceptive than the others. He could tell, just by sensing Jian's presence, this transformation wasn't something that could be achieved through sheer training. What he felt was something deeper. This was real martial arts. True strength had taken root in Lee Jian's body, and it wasn't something that could be faked. Their questions continued. They brought up a rumor, something about Jian defeating Ouyang Hu. They pressed further, demanding to know who had trained him, convinced that no one could possibly reach that level alone. But Lee Jian just smiled faintly and told them it was luck. That was all. Sima Guk, still trying to piece things together, smiled as well. He suggested that it must have been one of those fateful Jianghu encounters they always heard about but never experienced. Another friend quickly agreed, saying Jian had finally caught a break. He even admitted that at first he didn't recognize him. But that moment of levity vanished in an instant. With a cold and serious tone, Lee Jian raised his cup to his lips and stated something chilling. The man they once knew as Lee Jian was dead. The room froze. Every one of them stared at him, beads of sweat appearing on their faces. The weight of those words hit them hard, and none of them could laugh it off. Breaking the awkward silence, Zhu Jiaoyang, one of the group, nervously asked what he planned to do next. Without hesitation, Jian began to answer, about to mention something crucial, the demonic cult, but he stopped himself mid-sentence. Instead, he corrected his words, saying that he had debts tied to his sect that he needed to repay. In the meantime, he planned to help out with a merchant group while preparing for that responsibility. Suddenly, Lee Jian looked toward his friends, his gaze cold and unwavering. With a serious tone, he made his stance clear. He wasn't interested in anything anymore, except getting stronger. His words brought the room to another heavy silence. The air froze for a moment before the group, clearly caught off guard, started panicking and whispering among themselves. One of them, confused, turned to the others and blurted out in disbelief if they had walked into the wrong house by mistake. Another quickly responded, denying any fault and saying it definitely wasn't his doing. As this flurry of awkward energy spread among them, Sima Guk went quiet. He couldn't help but recall an old conversation he'd once had with Lee Jian. Back then, Jian had mentioned he was being sent away to recuperate. Sima had reacted with surprise, asking if he was really going somewhere just to recover. Jian had replied with resignation in his voice, saying it was basically exile, that his father must have been deeply disappointed in him. But Sima, holding a sake bottle in hand with a grin, had encouraged him. He said it was a good thing. This was Jian's chance to recover, study, and change his life. Back then, Jian had only responded with a bitter smile, doubting whether change was even possible. Still, deep down, he had hoped for it. Now, returning to the present, Sima Guk poured a glass of wine for Jian and offered a heartfelt congratulations. He looked at him warmly and remarked with a smile that Jian had really changed. Hearing that, Jian froze for a moment, shocked and confused. The sincerity in Sima's voice caught him off guard. The others fell quiet, watching the exchange, and then slowly they too softened. With a smile, one of them chimed in that it really was something worth celebrating. Another added, jokingly, that he always knew this would happen, that they should have kidnapped Jian before he got sent away. He even blamed the others for not showing up that day. Sima Guk chuckled at that and teased one of the guys, reminding him that he was too hungover to even make it that day. That friend quickly turned away and defensively claimed he was just busy. But the teasing didn't stop. Sima responded with sarcasm, suggesting that taking a dump probably didn't count as being busy. A playful argument broke out as they all started teasing each other. Watching them banter so naturally, Lee Jian smiled quietly to himself. In that moment, a warm thought passed through his mind. Turns out, even Jian had real friends. Then, Jian poured himself a glass of wine and muttered softly, as if confirming something within himself. He looked at the group with a calm, yet confident gaze and declared that he had changed. Then, with a faint smirk, he asked, "What about them?" That question stunned the group for a moment, but they quickly laughed it off, brushing it aside with their usual carefree energy. One of them joked that if they were the type to change easily, they wouldn't be themselves. Feeling the shift in mood, Jian awkwardly suggested they stop talking about such things. Everyone raised their cups and clinked them together, laughing loudly, the tension melting away into genuine camaraderie. As the laughter faded, Zhu Jiaoyang looked quietly into his cup, deep in thought. He recalled their old days together, back when they were just a bunch of naive kids. They had all thought of themselves as frogs stuck in a well, unable to see the vast world outside. But now, looking at Lee Jian, he realized that one of them had already climbed out and seen that world for himself. Some time passed, and the gathering began to wind down. One of the friends told Jian he had a good time today, and that if he ever needed anything, even from a bunch of wrecks like them, he should reach out. Zhu Jiaoyang called out with playful excitement, urging Jian to train hard so he didn't get beaten up somewhere again. Sima Guk patted Jian on the shoulder with a proud smile and congratulated him once more on his transformation. As they finally prepared to leave, Jian walked with them to the gate, waving goodbye. His friends waved back, their faces lit with sincere warmth. Later, as they walked through the streets of the city under the night sky, Guang looked up and let out a quiet thought. Among all of them, the one who had been the biggest screw-up had come back, all grown up, and that made it feel like their youth had truly come to an end. Sima Guk, feeling a bit tipsy, rubbed his head and admitted that he was feeling strangely lonely today. He told the others it was time to go. One of his friends quickly asked where they were heading, jokingly suggesting a brothel. But Sima Guk immediately shut that down, annoyed, saying they were going home. He reminded the guy he had flunked out and told him to go study. calling him an academy dropout. Zhu Jiaoyang laughed and, not taking offense, repeated what he always said, that it's not that he's bad at studying, just really bad at exams. Guang then looked at Sima Guk and casually asked if he wanted to stop by Sweet Scent House for one last drink. The scene shifts to the Sweet Scent House. A warrior was kneeling in front of the little deity sect leader, Yom Jisong, reporting what happened at Li Jinian's gathering. When Yom Jisong heard the report, he hit the table and asked in disbelief if Ouyang, who was really dead. Then he asked whether the heir of the Yunhe merchant group was actually that strong. The man confirmed it with a disappointed look. The fight hadn't even lasted 30 moves. Ouyang, who had been completely outmatched. He thought back to the fight, clearly frustrated, and admitted to himself that Jinian's skills were on another level. Yom Jisong, now a bit more composed, commented that it was impressive. He asked what kind of weapon Jinian had used. The man answered that Jinian fought using only his fists. Yom Jisong raised an eyebrow. A swordsman losing to someone who didn't even use a weapon, it wasn't a good look. He shook his head and said it was a disgrace. The man hesitated, then asked about taking revenge. Yom Jisong replied that there was no reason to. It was a fair duel, and they weren't the kind of group to seek revenge over that. Still, the man pushed the issue. He mentioned that Yom Jisong and Ouyang, who had been friends, and said there should be some honor between them. Before he could say anything more, Yom Jisong killed him on the spot. A girl standing nearby was startled by the sudden act. Yom Jisong looked at the body and simply said that no one befriends a corpse. Then he ordered his men to take the body away. One of them responded right away. Noticing the girl, Yom Jisong turned to her and apologized for not seeing her standing there. Her name was Saran. Then, sounding annoyed, he said the drink didn't taste good anymore and told his men they were heading back. A servant replied, confirming the order. Later, while thinking over the situation, Yom Jisong noted that the Yunhe merchant group had not only refused to pay taxes, but had also killed Ouyang Hu. He looked concerned and wondered aloud how to respond to that. One of his men commented that it seemed like the merchant group didn't even recognize the authority of the little deity sect anymore. Yom Jisong wasn't surprised and agreed, then clicked his tongue in frustration. Another subordinate asked if they should retaliate. Yom Jisong dismissed the idea and said that they couldn't just go around killing people. That wasn't how they operated. One of the subordinates looked at Yom Jisong and asked again, was he really just going to let the Yunhe merchant group go? Yom Jisong paused for a moment, thinking about it. At that same time, Li Jinian's friends walked into the place together, chatting among themselves. Zhu Jiaoyang commented that even after seeing how much their friend had changed, they were still the same as always. He admitted they were probably hopeless. Guang responded casually, saying that Jinian only asked for one drink anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. Zhu Jiaoyang looked over at him and said that even that small step felt like progress. Sima Guk nodded in agreement. At least it was something. As Sima Guk passed by the sect leader, he overheard Yom Jisong quietly say to his subordinate that he didn't know what would happen next, but he did want the Yunhe merchant group's money. That stopped Sima Guk in his tracks. He turned to glance back at Yom Jisong, thinking to himself about what he'd just heard. The Yunhe merchant group. Yom Jisong, unaware that anyone was listening, continued talking. He mentioned that Li Xiaogman, the elder of the Yunhe merchant group, was known to be a skilled negotiator. Rumor had it he was far wealthier than people assumed. Then he wondered out loud, how much would the young heir of such a group be worth? Sima Guk, now realizing what was going on, looked concerned. Sometime later, he stood in front of Li Jinian and shared everything he had overheard. After hearing the report, Jinian responded calmly, asking if Sima Guk had come running back to him. Breathing out, Sima Guk admitted it. Yeah, he had. Jinian rubbed his eyes and yawned, replying that it was touching, especially since he had taken his time getting there. That annoyed Sima Guk. He raised his voice and said the situation seemed serious. It looked like they were planning to attack Jinian at any moment. Still thinking things over, Sima Guk added that now that Ouyang, who was gone, Jinian's house didn't have proper guards anymore. He asked if they should reach out to Guang for help. Jinian, meanwhile, remembered something Ma Siep had told him earlier, that the little deity sect had been planning something behind their backs with Ouyang Hu. He kept a calm expression as he asked Sima where those people were now. Sima replied that they were probably already back at their base. Ji-neon told him to come inside for now. Sima was confused and asked where he was going, but Ji-neon didn't answer right away. A bit later, inside the house, the two of them were getting ready. Ji-neon handed something over and told Sima to put it on. Looking around the room in confusion, Sima asked what it even was and where they were. Ji-neon explained that it was the guard squad's warehouse. Then, turning to him seriously, Ji-neon asked if he knew the way to the little deity's sex base. He told him to get dressed quickly. They needed to be back by breakfast. Sima looked surprised. He asked if they were really going right now. Just the two of them? Starting to panic, he reminded Ji-neon that it was just the two of them, and over there was the entire little deity sect. He said Ji-neon didn't even know what they were up to. But Ji-neon picked up a knife and held it up. He said it didn't matter. That's exactly why they needed to move first. Sima still looked unsure and tried to say something in protest, but Ji-neon interrupted him, calling him Mirim Alliance hopeful. Ji-neon tossed the knife gently toward him. He told him to lead the way. The scene shifted to the little deity's sex base. Guards in yellow uniforms stood watch. Some of them posted at the gates, while others patrolled the area. From high up in a tree, Ji-neon observed everything. Looking down at the base, he thought to himself that there were a lot of guards. This had to be the place. Hiding in the bushes nearby, Sima Guk whispered to him, asking if he was sure this was it. He admitted nervously that he wouldn't be of any help and reminded Ji-neon of that. Ji-neon brushed the dust off one hand using the other and told Sima Guk that his job was done. Sima, still confused, asked if bringing him here was all he needed. Ji-neon looked at him and replied plainly, "What else could it be?" Sima looked toward the guard station inside and asked how they were supposed to get in, with the place crawling with security. He asked if Ji-neon had some brilliant plan. Ji-neon simply closed his eyes and said that for today, they'd do it his old way. He walked straight up to the door and kicked it open. As he looked around at the guards, he thought about his past life, about how Dan Wusong never backed down from a fight. Not when he was a child, not as an orphan surviving in the martial world, not even after earning the title of King of Fists. Now, back in the present, he looked at the guards in front of him and thought to himself, Dan Wusong was someone who enjoyed a good fight. Without hesitation, he walked forward and pointed toward a building, asking the guards where their sect leader was. One of them yelled back, calling him crazy for barging in and talking nonsense. But before the man could finish, Ji-neon snapped his neck and told him not to make him repeat himself. He dropped the body on the ground. That was enough to provoke the others. All the guards rushed toward him with swords, shouting at him, asking if he even understood where he was and who he was messing with. Just then, a voice called out from an upper floor. A man, holding a girl in his arms, looked down and asked what all the noise was about. He spotted Ji-neon and smiled, asking who he was. Ji-neon replied calmly, he was an assassin. Then he asked if the man was the head of the lesser immortal sect. The man, amused, asked what if he was. In his head, he was trying to figure out who Ji-neon was. He thought it was the first time he'd seen an assassin come in through the front door. Then he noticed Ji-neon's hands and remembered what one of his men had reported earlier. The kid fought with his fists. He asked Ji-neon if he was the heir of the Galaxy Merchant Guild. Ji-neon replied, "And what if I am?" The sect leader stroked his beard and said he didn't expect someone so important to show up personally. Then his tone shifted. He said that in that case, he wouldn't hold back. Suddenly, a net dropped down above Ji-neon, but he dodged it easily. The guards shouted to get him. Ji-neon, now surrounded, thought to himself that it had been a long time since he fought a group like this. Maybe not since back then. He grabbed the net and swung it, using it as a weapon. As he took down enemies one by one, he thought to himself that even if his current body wasn't what it used to be, the thrill of battle remained. He tore through them easily, breaking weapons with no weapon of his own. Despite all that, he smiled to himself. This was actually starting to feel fun. The remaining guards hesitated. Some asked who he even was, shocked that he was fighting like that without a weapon. Just then, a sharp object flew past him and sliced his mask and cheek. Blood trickled down as he wiped his face. He looked in the direction the projectile had come from and asked if someone was trying to show off their fancy gear. The sect leader answered with a smirk, saying he didn't usually like using expensive tools, but he'd make an exception for Ji-neon. He raised a crossbow and aimed. Two guards grabbed Jinion's legs from both sides. The sect leader told them to hold him down. One of the guards grabbing him thought to himself that he was definitely going to die today. The sect leader aimed and told Jinion that even if he was good with fists, there was no way he could dodge this. More men appeared beside him, each holding crossbows. He gave the order to fire. Jinion stood still as the arrows came flying toward him. In his mind, he noted that the sect leader clearly didn't care if his own men got hit. Even someone like Darkblade would be speechless at this reckless tactic. Suddenly, Sima Guk shouted from behind and threw a knife toward Jinion, yelling for him to catch it. Jinion caught the knife midair and deflected every incoming arrow. The sect leader, watching in shock, realized that Jinion had blocked them all with just that one dagger. Jinion turned to look at Sima Guk. Sima looked confused, but then Jinion gave him a thumbs up. Sima Guk returned the gesture. Then Jinion gripped the knife and threw it. It scratched the sect leader's throat before hitting the wall behind him. Jinion told him calmly that he didn't usually use blades, but made an exception for him. The sect leader, clutching the small wound on his neck, cursed under his breath and called Jinion a psycho. He turned to his men and yelled at them for just standing there. He ordered them to kill Jinion immediately. But before they could react, Jinion dashed forward and closed the distance in an instant. The sect leader could barely process what was happening. Jinion was already in front of him. Jinion readied his fist and said that his real strength was in his fists. The sect leader quickly pulled the girl in front of him, trying to use her as a human shield. But Jinion didn't stop. He used his lightning martial arts to strike with force. The explosion from the impact shook the room. As the dust cleared, Jinion was holding the girl safely in his arms. He gently let her go and told her to stay back. The sect leader sat on the ground, shaking from fear. He looked up at Jinion and wondered what kind of person he really was. If Jinion was the heir to the Galaxy Merchant Guild, he should be a young man, but the way he fought felt like someone who had survived countless battles. Jinion looked down at him coldly and asked what he was staring at. Did he have something to say? The sect leader tried to save himself. He laughed awkwardly and offered money. He said he had plenty stashed away and promised to reward Jinion generously if he spared his life. But Jinion stepped on him and told him to stop putting a price tag on people's lives. He pulled back his fist and said he didn't need any of it. The sect leader could keep his money. Then Jinion drove his fist into the man's chest, piercing through his heart and killing him instantly. The room fell silent as everyone looked on in shock. Jinion pulled his hand back out and glanced at the body. He muttered one final word as he looked at the corpse. Filthy. That's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed this manhwa. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you either in a new Manhwa Recap or in the next episode of this one. Until then, take care and bye-bye. As morning arrived, the protagonist, his friend Sima Guk, and the girl he had recently saved were walking together. Along the way, Sima Guk turned to Jinion and mentioned that he would be taking a different route. He offered to escort the girl instead. Jinion agreed and entrusted her to his friend. Sima Guk and the girl then walked away from Jinion. After a short while, the girl looked at him and asked if he was young Master Sima Guk. He was surprised and asked how she knew. The girl chuckled softly and explained that she had seen him at Danhyang multiple times. She also added that since he was clearly close with Jinion, it wasn't hard to figure out. Understanding her point, Sima Guk nodded. The girl then gave a respectful bow and thanked him for what he had done that day. She promised that if he ever returned, she would serve him a bottle of top-grade rice wine as a token of gratitude. Sima Guk waved her off casually, saying there was no need. He hadn't done anything noteworthy. He also mentioned that he didn't plan to visit the pleasure quarters anymore. The girl looked at him and commented that he had truly changed. He responded briefly, then glanced over toward Jinion and added that he, too, had to change, especially since his friend had changed so much already. Meanwhile, Jinion was walking toward his home, thinking to himself that it was time for breakfast. Some time later, after finishing his bath, he stepped into a room where a table full of food awaited him. He invited the two bald men he had brought from the entertainment district to eat, encouraging them to be comfortable. The two men gratefully accepted and responded politely. Jinion, in a gentle tone, told them not to hold back and to eat freely whenever they were hungry. One of the men expressed amazement at the generosity of the trading company. while the other jokingly asked if eating 7 meals a day was acceptable. Jineon calmly confirmed that it was. As they chatted, the two bald men noticed Jineon's wound had already closed. They asked if he had been all right the previous night. Jineon gave a vague response while holding his chopsticks, but in his mind, he reflected on the situation. He realized that the sudden incident had shaken his core, something that wouldn't have happened in his previous life. This made him recognize the need to grow stronger. He understood that if he truly intended to protect the merchant group and stand against magic users, ordinary training wouldn't be enough. He needed something beyond conventional methods. Just then, a voice from outside his door informed him that a delivery had arrived. Curious, Jineon acknowledged it. A servant girl entered and placed a box on the table. As he opened it, he muttered that he hadn't been expecting anything. Inside was a letter from his friend, Gu Wong. The letter explained that after they had parted ways, Gu Wong had stopped by a tavern, had a single drink, and then left. He jokingly called it a sign of real progress. Jineon smiled as he read it. The letter continued, revealing that Gu Wong had also meant to deliver something on Jineon's father's behalf the day before, but had forgotten. Now he was sending it along. Jineon paused at the mention of his father, feeling surprised. The letter concluded with Gu Wong saying he would leave the item with Jineon and asking him to help watch over their escort agency once he had become stronger. As Jineon examined the contents of the first box, he immediately recognized what was inside. It was a piece of century root. Judging by its appearance and condition, it had likely been aged for 4 or even 5 centuries. He estimated that, with a bit of luck, it could help him raise his White Lightning 10-stage art to the 5th level. Holding the root in his hand, he reflected on the moment with quiet appreciation, realizing this was the kind of gesture that showed the true value of having a good friend. He then turned to the next box placed beside him. Inside was another letter. This one was addressed from the Teiho Trading Company. The letter spoke of a long-standing trust and friendship with his father and a gift offered in honor of that bond. As Jineon processed the message, he recognized the name of the firm. It was one of the wealthiest and most influential trading companies in the Central Plains. He realized his father must have reached out to them personally for assistance. The depth of that gesture and the effort behind it caught him off guard. He hadn't expected such care and foresight. Inside the box was a bottle, and as soon as he saw it, he was struck with surprise. It was pure, void stone milk, a miraculous elixir that martial artists could only dream of acquiring. It belonged to the same legendary tier as the 1,000-year spirit fruit, moon elixir flower, and 10,000-year snow ginseng. All of them were incredibly rare and nearly impossible to obtain. Jineon brought the bottle close and inhaled its scent. There was no doubt it was genuine. Even in his previous life, he had only managed to taste a few drops of it. He found it hard to believe that a merchant had managed to acquire something even top martial artists struggled to find. Turning to the two bald men seated nearby, he called out their names, Myongbo and Jinbo, and handed each of them a portion of the medicine. One of them immediately prepared to begin circulating his chi, asking the other to guard the room and eat later. As he accepted the dose, he asked what it was. Jineon simply told him it was good for the body and warned him not to lose it, emphasizing its rarity. Surprised by the comment, the man stood up and walked over to a nearby storage room. Opening the door, he gestured inside and revealed stacks of similar rare items, all prepared for Jineon. Seeing this, even Jineon couldn't help but be taken aback. A smile formed on his face as he silently acknowledged the simple truth. Money really was a powerful thing. 2 hours later, Jineon was seated cross-legged in his room, meditating. As he consumed the elixir, he noted its taste, bitter and without aroma. It reminded him of martial arts itself, bitter in the beginning, with no immediate reward. Training was painful, and often it felt like there was no progress at all. Soon, his body began to react. A strong heat spread through his core. He recognized that in his past life, his body would have already broken down under this intensity. Fortunately, he had taken the time to strengthen himself beforehand. A sharp pain surged through him, intense enough to force his eyes open. It felt as if his entire body was burning. The more he tried to suppress the pain, the more fiercely it fought back. Realizing resistance was futile, he changed his approach. He would push through it instead. With that decision, a wave of powerful energy burst out from his body. Some time later, Jineon exhaled deeply. As he examined his hand, he activated his energy with a focused gesture. Then, clenching his fist, he confirmed to himself that he had reached the 5th stage. However, a sharp smell caught his attention. He looked at his clothing and realized that the toxins released from his body carried a strong stench of alcohol. He wondered just how much the previous owner of the body had drunk for the impurities to still reek so strongly. Genion looked down at himself and smiled softly. It felt like a farewell to the remnants of his old self. But his attention soon shifted to the glass bottle beside him. He picked it up, eyes narrowing in thought. What lay ahead wasn't going to be easy. Absorbing pure voidstone milk at this stage was like trying to form a bowl out of wet sand and then tossing it into a blazing furnace. The fragile structure was almost guaranteed to crack under the pressure. Yet, if he could endure the process, the reward would be immense. He could feel the intense spiritual energy within the elixir. It was testing him. As the dense black aura began to swirl around him, a thought crossed his mind. Perhaps he had become too greedy. Still, he clenched his fist in determination. With a powerful leap, he took off, heading toward a secluded spot to begin the next stage of his transformation. If he could overcome this trial, he knew he would emerge stronger than ever before. 7 days passed. Outside Genion's room, his brother, Liwa Ian, stood with a troubled expression. It had been exactly a week since Jin Eon had started circulating his energy, and there had been no signs of movement or sound from within. Concerned, he reached for the door, but the two bald guards stationed outside immediately stepped in front of him, blocking the way. They greeted him formally. Recognizing them, Liwa Ian returned the greeting. He asked if there had been any updates. One of the men replied that there had been none, but Jin Eon had left clear instructions not to let anyone near. Hearing this, Liwa Ian let out a sigh, wiping sweat from his brow as confusion set in. He mumbled that even so, going this long without contact seemed concerning. Before he could finish his thought, a sudden explosion blasted through the door from within the room. The two guards quickly shielded Liwa Ian from the blast with their bodies. As the dust settled, Liwa Ian stared in shock at the sight in front of him. Emerging from the room was Jin Eon, his eyes glowing with lightning, energy radiating violently from his body. The overwhelming stench coming from the room made Liwa Ian recoil and cover his nose. His thoughts raced. Was this the condition known as chi deviation, something he had only heard about in passing? Panicked, all three men rushed toward Genion. One of the guards called out urgently to him. Two bodyguards then tackled Genion, trying to pin him down in hopes of stabilizing his energy. They pleaded with him to come back to his senses. Liwa Ian tried to speak, beginning to ask if his brother was all right, but his words stopped midway. As he got a good look at Genion's face, a chill ran through him. What he saw frightened him so much that he couldn't say another word. Liwa Ian quickly caught his brother in his arms, trying to steady him after the sudden outburst of energy. But Genion rose to his feet once more without saying a word and began walking away. One of the bodyguards called out behind him, asking if he was all right and where he was going. Genion, without turning around, simply responded that it was too hot and that he needed to cool off, insisting they not follow him. Without hesitation, Genion leapt onto the rooftop and dashed off into the distance. Liwa Ian stood frozen, watching his younger brother disappear. He had no words to respond. After a moment, he quietly questioned to himself how anyone could be hot on such a perfectly clear day. Meanwhile, Genion kept running. His thoughts were in turmoil as intense heat surged through his body. He could feel every part of himself burning. His physique, still not fully attuned to the immense power he had taken in, was reacting violently. Clutching his throat, he tried to suppress the sensation, but the energy inside him continued to rage uncontrollably. He realized that if this went on, it wouldn't just be the Yunha merchant group at risk, he could endanger the entire street. He needed to put as much distance between himself and others as possible. Eventually, he stopped at a remote mountain peak. His body was covered in veins bulging under the pressure, with lightning surging all around him. The pain had reached its peak. He thought of the color blue, likely tied to his energy state, and acknowledged that he couldn't contain it any longer. Memories of his death in his past life flickered through his mind. He knew that if he couldn't embrace this energy, he would face the same fate once more. Raising his hand toward the sky, he made a decision. The power had to be released. In that moment, a bolt of lightning struck down from the sky, crashing directly into him with a thunderous impact. Some distance away, in a nearby village, two people noticed the phenomenon. One of them watched in awe as the scene unfolded, observing the lightning surge from the earth toward the heavens. It was a sight he had never witnessed before, a reverse strike that defied natural order. Sometime after the intense phenomenon had ended, Jineon stood alone on the mountain. Rain poured down steadily around him as he remained silent, letting the moment settle. Clenching his fist, he counted under his breath 6, then paused and corrected himself 7. A smile formed on his face. If he was able to release that much energy, it could only mean one thing. He glanced at his hand, activating his energy once more to confirm it. The answer was clear. He had reached the 8th phase. Later, Jineon walked through the city streets, still partially undressed from the aftermath of his training. His presence turned heads immediately. Several passers-by, especially the young women, blushed as they watched him walk by. A few whispered in surprise, wondering who the half-naked man was. Taking notice, Jineon quietly thought to himself that he should at least get some clothes. Sometime after, he was inside a clothing shop, now dressed in a sharp outfit that gave him the refined appearance of a nobleman. He looked in the mirror, then turned to the shop owner and said he'd take the outfit. He asked for the price. To his surprise, the shop owner responded with a gentle laugh and insisted there was no need to pay. Jineon, confused by the generosity, hesitated. He didn't feel right about taking it for free. But the shop owner explained with a warm smile that ever since Jineon had beaten up the troublemakers from the Ouyang clan and the Little Deity sect, the streets had become noticeably safer. Fewer thugs caused problems now, and that peace had made it easier for him to bring his children to the shop. He pointed to his child nearby and expressed gratitude, saying that the free clothes were his way of repaying Jineon. As he noticed the rain still pouring outside, he offered an umbrella as well. The shop owner's child walked up, holding out the umbrella toward Jineon. Seeing this small gesture, Jineon smiled back and accepted it graciously. A short while later, he stood outside the shop in the rain, waving back at the shop owner and his children. As he continued down the street, Jineon looked around and reflected on the changes. Things truly did feel more peaceful now. In the past, he never paid attention to what the streets looked like after a fight. But now, recalling the shop owner's words, he could feel the difference his actions had made. People were safer, families were more relaxed, and the atmosphere felt lighter. Looking ahead, he saw people laughing and enjoying themselves. For the first time, Jineon found himself smiling at the sight. The feeling wasn't so bad. Suddenly, his attention snapped toward a commotion behind him. Someone was running through the street in a panic, shouting for others to move aside. The man shoved someone out of the way, tried to escape from a group that was chasing him. The people behind him yelled not to let the man get away. As Jineon observed the scene, he immediately recognized the person on the run. It was Chil Myungo. His thoughts locked onto the name with surprise. The man who had been chased earlier suddenly appeared before the protagonist. With a casual smile, he greeted him, commenting on the heavy rain. The protagonist looked at him with visible disappointment, noting that he hadn't changed at all. As the man stood confidently in front of him, the protagonist remarked again on how he was always caught up in a busy life. Meanwhile, a large number of people from the Moyang clan had gathered at the Emperor's assembly. Among them, a red-haired man confidently acknowledged the significance of all the clan patriarchs coming together after such a long time. He specifically praised Moyang Bin for his efforts. This red-haired man was Dako Mayong, the patriarch of the Dako clan. In response, a green-haired man humbly dismissed the praise, saying he had only arranged the meeting. This was Moyang Bin, the patriarch of the Moyang clan. Then, turning to another figure, he brought up a recent issue, mentioning that he'd heard about a regrettable incident involving Ouyang Seng's clan. He stated that Ouyang, who had apparently challenged a member of a merchant group to a duel and died as a result, asking if it was true. Hearing this, Ouyang Seng, the patriarch of the Ouyang clan, looked visibly irritated and surprised. Another person in the room then questioned the situation further, pointing out that Ouyang, who was supposed to be one of the more skilled martial masters of the clan. Yet another added that Ouyang, who had caused trouble with a merchant group, made a scene and ended up being severely defeated. Just then, loud laughter erupted in the assembly hall. Everyone turned toward the source, which was none other than Nam Gong Wu, the leader of the Emperor's Assembly and the patriarch of the Namgun clan. Known as the world's strongest martial artist and often referred to as the Blade Emperor, Namgun Wu was laughing heartily, mocking the situation. He found it ridiculous that someone from a merchant group had defeated a member of the Ouyang clan, calling it even funnier than a jester's performance. He asked if others agreed with him. One man in the assembly could be seen trembling with anger, though another quickly agreed with Namgun Wu to avoid conflict. At that moment, Ouyang Sing, now visibly furious, exclaimed that Ouyang had already been expelled from their clan. With his frustration boiling over, he declared that it was time to remind the merchant group of the true power of the Ouyang clan. Back on the street, the protagonist stood with his friend. He looked worn out and clearly exhausted from everything that had just happened. Li Jin-ian looked at his friend and remarked that he was always living a busy life. Before the conversation could continue, one of the gang members pointed a finger at Li Jin-ian and ordered him a hand over his friend, warning him not to get involved in something that could get him hurt. Li Jin-ian's tone turned cold as he asked his friend, Myungo, who these people were. Myungo explained that they were members of the Crimson Reaper Alliance, the most notorious underworld gang at the moment. They had recently been trying to take over the downtown district. He went on to say that, since he was involved in the auction business, he had discovered they had taken his ledgers when he went to organize the books, a theft he clearly resented. Li Jin-ian then asked if Myungo's hands had healed. Myungo showed his hands and said they were still usable, even managing a laugh. Facing the gang, Li Jin-ian stated calmly that they didn't seem to be from the area. He told them to come back when Myungo's hands had fully recovered, but to leave for now. The gang members were irritated, thinking his words were nonsense and that he must have grown up sheltered. But despite their thoughts, they felt an inexplicable pressure from him. One hot-headed member ignored a companion's warning, stepped up to Li Jin-ian, and arrogantly pointed a finger at him, demanding to know who he thought he was. Before he could finish, Li Jin-ian flicked his forehead with a single finger, sending him flying several meters and knocking him out instantly. Li Jin-ian then looked at the rest of the gang and told them he was hungry, and if they fought now, he might kill them all. He advised them to leave while he was still being nice and promised they would meet again, either through Myungo or himself. The gang, clearly intimidated, bowed and quickly left. Myungo, now more relaxed, turned to Li Jin-ian and asked him to buy food, saying noodles would be fine. With a disappointed expression, he clarified that the last time he was on the verge of death wasn't because Li Jin-ian had beaten him, but because he was starving. He even remarked that food had always been the most important thing in the Central Plains. Irritated, Li Jin-ian told him he could have just asked without saying so much, calling him insane. Myungo simply grinned and replied that it was surprising Li Jin-ian was only realizing that now. He then excitedly suggested they go to Jinpyeong Noodles, claiming it had the best noodles. Later, in the restaurant, Myungo finished his bowl and leaned back with satisfaction, saying he finally felt alive. After finishing his meal, Myungo looked at Li Jin-ian with a serious expression, teasing that it seemed like a branch of the beggar sect had taken up residence in his stomach. He pointed out how Li Jin-ian used to eat very little, like a bird, but now had changed completely. Myungo added that people shouldn't change so suddenly and should live according to the natural order. Turning toward the shop owner, he ordered 2 more bowls of noodles, then quickly changed it to 4. The owner agreed without hesitation. After a short pause, Myungo awkwardly asked about the twins. Li Jin-ian replied simply that they were doing well. When asked what they were doing, he answered flatly, training. Myungo guessed they must have grown stronger and then asked for another bowl, even though he already had one in his hands. He remarked that their food expenses must be huge, calling them gluttonous spirits. Li Jin-ian replied with a blank expression, I'm rich, which slightly irritated Myungo, who reminded him that he had also helped in the past. Shifting topics, Myungo asked how one could learn proper martial arts. Li Jin-ian questioned the reason, but Myungo avoided eye contact and explained that he was wondering if martial arts training would help him take on the Crimson Reaper, the leader of the gang they encountered earlier. He described the Crimson Reaper as someone with countless subordinates who attacked in overwhelming numbers and retreated quickly when needed. Li Jin-ian asked Myungo if he wanted to be taught martial arts. Myungo hesitated for a moment before saying he'd be grateful. Crossing his arms, Li Jin-ian asked if Myungo would follow his instructions exactly, to which Myungo confidently replied that of course he would. After all, he was the poisonous fox, Chul Myungo. Lee Jin-ian then pointed at the ground and told him to bow. Myungo rubbed his head in mild irritation, calling the request embarrassing, but eventually bowed without further complaint. Standing back up, he jokingly threatened that if Lee Jin-ian didn't teach him, he'd make a scene in front of the Yunha Merchant Group's gates. Instead of responding seriously, Lee Jin-ian swung the shop's borrowed umbrella and held it out, telling Myungo to hold it like he did. Myungo was stunned at the simplicity of the lesson and asked if that was really it. Lee Jin-ian simply asked what else he expected. Myungo grew frustrated, complaining that he had even bowed and threatened again to cause trouble. Before he could finish, Lee Jin-ian struck him with the umbrella and told him to shut up, instructing him to take the umbrella with one hand. Myungo held the umbrella and asked what to do next. Lee Jin-ian explained that it was a gift and couldn't be given away, but Myungo could borrow it. He instructed him to swing it exactly as demonstrated 100,000 times and then return it. He emphasized that if Myungo didn't want to commit to this, he should give up on learning martial arts entirely. Shocked, Myungo confirmed the number, clarifying that it wasn't 1,000 or 10,000, but a full 100,000 swings. Lee Jin-ian, unfazed, told him to stop talking so much and either get to work or leave. When Myungo questioned whether he was serious, Lee Jin-ian grabbed his collar and reminded him that learning a few basic moves wouldn't be enough to kill someone. He explained that with 100,000 repetitions, Myungo could at least defeat half of those men they had faced earlier with just a wooden sword. Instead, Myungo had run away like a frightened animal. Lee Jin-ian told him bluntly that if he was going to live such a pitiful life, he might as well die, prompting Myungo to nervously say he didn't want to die. Releasing him, Lee Jin-ian told him to remember whether he was a rat or a poisonous fox, and to stop making empty boasts. Outside, the rain continued to fall. Myungo suddenly stood and asked to borrow the umbrella. Before he could leave, the shop owner approached Lee Jin-ian and asked him to pay for Myungo's food as well. After paying, Lee Jin-ian thought to himself that he would wait to see if Myungo would take the training seriously. He then shifted his attention to the Crimson Reaper Alliance, recalling his promise to seek them out and deciding it must be kept. The scene then moved to the Crimson Reaper Alliance headquarters. Inside a dimly lit room, a man sat on a bed while two bloodied corpses lay on the floor. In front of him, the group from earlier knelt in submission. A red-haired man looked at them and asked why they had allowed Chul Myungo to escape. The red-haired man questioned his subordinates, repeating their claim. They had almost caught everyone, but one of the poisonous fox's friends had stopped them, and they were saying that a merchant group's son had stood against all of them. The subordinates, sweating and visibly shaken, swore it was true. They explained that the man was extremely skilled in martial arts, with rumors calling him the strongest in the Manhwa region. Before they could finish, the red-haired man's gaze sharpened, his red eyes silencing them. He then gave the order, have the men on standby, find both of them, and kill them. The scene shifted to Lee Jin-ian, who was hearing troubling news. One of the twins explained that the Crimson Reaper was infamous for his brutality, preferring to tear opponents apart with his bare hands. The leaders of multiple sects, the Jangsin sect, the Nopio sect, the Horn Dragon sect, and the Hongrak Pavilion, had all been killed by him. He had absorbed several factions in the Yukwan region, forcing tribute money from every business, from escort agencies and merchant groups to inns and pleasure houses. Even Chul Myungo had been extorted. The twins added that just the day before, the Crimson Reaper had taken over an entire auction house. Lee Jin-ian listened, toweling off sweat from training, and acknowledged that if the Crimson Reaper discovered his identity, the merchant group could become involved in unnecessary trouble. He decided he should confront the man first, before that could happen. Night fell over the Yukwan shopping district. At the Passion House, the building was busy, with guests filling every floor. Two women conversed, one instructing the other to check if guests in a certain room had left. Suddenly, a scream rang out, and another woman was comforted by her colleagues. She had gone into the Crimson Reaper's room, and something had happened. Worse, another woman named Seoli was still inside. One of the women, Zhonghua, was informed that a new guest had arrived downstairs. She instructed the others to take the shaken woman away, let her rest, and avoid disturbing the Crimson Reaper. Lee Jin-ian entered the establishment. Zhonghua approached with a welcoming smile, introducing herself as the manager and beginning to explain the house. But Lee Jin-Ian interrupted her with a direct question. Was the Crimson Reaper here? Manhwa froze, startled, and asked him to repeat himself. Lee Jin-Ian repeated himself to Manhwa, saying he was looking for the Crimson Reaper. She became slightly flustered, her voice trembling as she asked if he meant the association leader and whether he had made an appointment. Lee Jin-Ian answered simply, no, and told her to just confirm if the man was upstairs. Hesitating, Manhwa glanced at a crimson subordinate nearby, debating whether to answer. Finally, she told him that the Crimson Reaper was indeed upstairs. Without waiting to hear more, Lee Jin-Ian walked past her, calling her by name and instructing her to evacuate the others. Her mind flashed back to an earlier thought. Seolei was still inside that room. Nervously, she warned him that heading up would be difficult, as the association leader's temper was rough. Lee Jin-Ian only smiled and said it was fine. As he approached the stairs, one of the Crimson subordinates stepped forward, blocking his path. The man demanded to know who he was, warning that this wasn't a place anyone could enter freely. Lee Jin-Ian didn't respond, continuing up the stairs. The subordinate struck at him in anger, but Lee Jin-Ian quickly caught the man's spear and threw him to the ground. The commotion drew the attention of the other Crimson men. They surrounded him, demanding if he even knew where he was. Lee Jin-Ian looked at them with a sharp, threatening gaze and asked which floor the Crimson Reaper was on. His words only enraged them further. They attacked, shouting insults. Lee Jin-Ian calmly replied that if necessary, he would find the Crimson Reaper after killing all of them. As one man swung at him with a sword, Lee Jin-Ian seized the attacker's head, took the weapon, and used it to defeat them one by one. He fought using only the weapons he took from his opponents, systematically knocking each one down until the floor was clear. Finally, he stopped and looked at a nearby door. With certainty, he remarked that it wasn't the right room. Lee Jin-Ian prepared to attack again, asking aloud if he needed to smash every room. He began breaking into each one, sending the occupants fleeing in panic. After clearing several, he paused in front of another door, shouting in frustration that the Crimson Reaper wasn't there, and concluded he must be on the next floor. Meanwhile, in his private room, the Crimson Reaper sat calmly on his bed. Suddenly, two men were thrown inside, sent flying by Lee Jin-Ian's assault. One of them, trembling on the floor, reached toward the leader and tried to speak. Stammering, he identified Lee Jin-Ian as the merchant group's son. Before the man could finish, Lee Jin-Ian stepped on him, slamming him back to the ground. Confidently approaching, Lee Jin-Ian told the Crimson Reaper he had found him. The leader looked him over, speaking with casual arrogance. He guessed that Lee Jin-Ian had come to pay Chul Myung-go's debt in his stead. Lee Jin-Ian ignored the remark, noting to himself that the leader's room was on the 5th floor and that it was unnecessarily high. The Crimson Reaper stood and walked toward him, asking if the welcome party wasn't to his liking and if the climb had been difficult. Lee Jin-Ian, now surrounded by many Crimson subordinates, stated that it hadn't been a problem, as stomping on his way up was his specialty. The two men now stood face to face. The Crimson Reaper smirked, saying his own specialty was looking down from above. Lee Jin-Ian, rather than being intimidated, thought to himself that this was why he liked dealing with underworld types. Beating them was always satisfying. He then noticed something on the bed. The Crimson Reaper brushed it off, saying he had simply lost control of his strength, and ordered his men to remove the person from the room. Lee Jin-Ian's expression darkened. Calling the man beyond rehabilitation, he asked in a low, dangerous voice how he should kill him. The Crimson Reaper said he liked those eyes, explaining that people who try to kill him always look that way, and that he had ripped all of them apart with his bare hands. Outside, civilians were fleeing the building, screaming. Someone asked what was happening, and a Crimson subordinate answered that some lunatic was tearing the entire pleasure house apart, urging the man to escape as well. Instead, the man raised an umbrella like a weapon and muttered a number, 2874, before striking the subordinate. Removing his hood, he revealed himself as Chul Myung-go. He made a universal gesture toward the Crimson men, declaring he was there to crush them one by one. Practicing his swings with the umbrella, he continued counting 2875, 2876, 2877, when suddenly a loud explosion came from the building where Lee Jin-Ian was. Chul Myung-go froze, looking toward it in shock, realizing something significant had just happened inside. The red-haired association leader is suddenly thrown out of the building, crashing violently against the ground. Following closely behind him, the protagonist leaps out as well, landing with confident precision before striking the leader mid-air and sending him skidding further across the dirt. With firm steps, the protagonist calmly lands in front of the fallen man, standing tall and unwavering. The association leader slowly rises from the ground, wiping the dust from himself as his eyes fix on the protagonist. Instead of showing fear, he reveals a twisted smile of amusement, clearly intrigued by this unexpected turn of events. Without wasting time, he signals to one of his subordinates. The loyal follower quickly rushes to his side, handing him a weapon. Gripping it tightly, the leader swings it once through the air, testing its balance and preparing to face the opponent before him. The red-haired leader brandishes the weapon with confidence, determined to at least show his strength. He lunges forward, unleashing a barrage of attacks. However, the protagonist moves effortlessly, dodging each strike with minimal movement, almost as if the attempts were too slow to even matter. At the perfect moment, the protagonist reaches out and seizes the weapon, halting it completely with his bare hand. The grip is strong and unshakable, surprising the leader. A wave of realization sweeps over the red-haired man's thoughts. In disbelief, he questions how the young master of a mere merchant family could possess such monstrous strength that not only withstands but matches his own. His pride stings, yet his fighting spirit surges. He releases the weapon, letting it fall away, and instantly launches himself forward with renewed determination. In his mind, the leader vows to crush his opponent with the sheer rebound force of his own body. Gathering strength in his fist, he prepares a direct strike, intent on breaking through any defense, daring the protagonist to block the blow. The protagonist, however, observes carefully. His sharp eyes take note of the man's technique, recognizing the influence of meteor hammer skills combined with refined fist techniques. The precision in his movements reflects training under a legitimate orthodox martial artist. His execution is clean, sharp, and deliberate. Yet, the protagonist's expression remains calm, even slightly impressed, as he analyzes every detail. Without hesitation, he counters. His thoughts steady, he acknowledges the difference. The association leader may have skill, but his true opponent now is someone far beyond his level, the one known as the Fist King. With explosive speed, the protagonist drives his fist directly into the leader's stomach. The impact resonates, forcing the air out of the red-haired man as his body buckles under the sheer power. Coughing and stumbling, he staggers back, clutching his abdomen. The protagonist quickly pulls away, distancing himself with perfect control as his opponent struggles to steady himself. Though clearly injured, the leader doesn't falter. He grits his teeth, forcing a laugh between pained breaths. Despite the damage, he acknowledges the strength of the man before him, realizing that he, too, has trained in formidable fist techniques. Determined not to lose, the leader raises his arm once again, declaring his intent to fight with everything he has. His voice roars with defiance as he charges, consumed with rage, claiming he will tear his enemy to pieces. But in the clash that follows, the protagonist's dominance is absolute. He meets the attack head-on, overpowers him with sheer force, and throws the red-haired man back down onto the ground once more. The leader groans in agony, his body writhing under the weight of defeat. As he lies there, thoughts cloud his mind. He cannot comprehend it. Despite giving his all, every ounce of his strength and skill, he is being utterly overwhelmed. Shock and disbelief consume him. For the first time, he questions whether victory is truly possible. The protagonist suddenly grabbed the face of the association leader with his hand, forcing him down against the ground. He stood above him, looking down with a cold expression, his presence dominating the moment. Without hesitation, the protagonist activated his electric martial arts, sending a current of energy through his palm into the leader's body. The energy pulsed violently, growing stronger with each stage he unleashed. First came the second stage, releasing a sharp jolt that made the association leader convulse in pain. His scream echoed as electricity surged through him. The protagonist showed no mercy, immediately pushing further. The energy increased again. Third stage. The leader's body shook harder, the shock tearing through him. The protagonist continued, raising it to the fourth stage, and then again to the fifth stage, each level amplifying the damage. The overwhelming current left the association leader writhing, unable to resist. Nearby, one of the leader's subordinates watched with wide eyes, his face dripping with sweat. He stuttered, barely able to speak, questioning if they should step in to stop it. But before anything could be done, something unusual appeared in the sky. The subordinate's expression shifted to shock as he pointed upwards, realizing what was about to happen. The protagonist raised his hand and unleashed his ultimate technique. White lightning 10-stage art. Thunderclap. A massive lightning dragon formed, descending with explosive force. The ground erupted with a deafening blast as the dragon struck the association leader directly, vaporizing him in an instant. The impact left onlookers speechless, many of them frozen in shock. Some whispered in disbelief, saying the attack was nothing less than the purge of the dark path. The leader of the association, feared by so many, had been completely obliterated before their eyes. With the battle finished, the protagonist turned his gaze toward the remaining subordinates. His eyes were sharp, filled with disdain, as he confronted them. He demanded to know who they thought they were, collecting tribute from the weak. His voice was steady as he questioned their purpose and their right to drain the lifeblood of powerless people. The subordinates trembled, their bodies shaking under his words. None dared to respond properly, fear weighing heavily on them. The protagonist made his stance clear. If they wanted to flaunt strength, they should come directly to him instead of preying on the helpless. He adjusted his hair with visible disgust, his expression making it clear he looked down on them. Then he warned them all, stating firmly that if they continued down this path, they would end up just like their fallen leader. That final statement only fueled their panic. Some, however, desperate and angry, tried to rally together. They shouted at one another not to be afraid, reminding themselves it was just one man standing against them. With rage clouding their judgment, they charged at the protagonist, screaming that they would kill him. As the fight reached its conclusion, the onlookers began whispering among themselves, still shaken by what they had witnessed. They struggled to process the sight of the fearsome association leader, the so-called Red Reaper, being utterly defeated. Some muttered in disbelief, wondering if the Red Reaper was truly dead. Others questioned the identity of the young man who had stood against him, trying to understand where such overwhelming power had come from. Confusion spread quickly. If the Red Reaper was gone, and his men were about to be wiped out, then who would they be forced to pay tribute to now? A sense of cautious relief stirred in them, but just as quickly, doubt followed. What if this new figure, the one who had just crushed the Red Reaper, demanded tribute himself? Before the uncertainty could grow further, the protagonist's companion stepped forward. He placed his mask back on and addressed the gathered crowd with calm certainty. He assured them that the protagonist was not that kind of person. When some of the onlookers looked uncertain, he reinforced the claim, confidently repeating it. He even added that the protagonist had more than enough wealth already, leaving no reason for the people to worry about being exploited again. After that, the masked companion casually began swinging his umbrella in hand, almost as if nothing serious had just taken place. He started counting aloud, his numbers precise, 2,877, 2,878. His behavior left the crowd stunned and bewildered. Many exchanged looks, silently wondering if he had lost his mind. One of them, however, turned his gaze back toward the protagonist and thought to himself that despite the oddities of the companion, the young man himself was an incredible fighter. That thought triggered a memory, recalling the protagonist's words about how every person carried a spark within their heart and how nurturing that spark was a personal responsibility. The scene shifted to the companion once more, standing calmly in the middle of the city. With quiet reflection, he spoke to himself, almost as though affirming his own path. He acknowledged the desire to grow stronger, strong enough that the very pursuit could drive one mad. His eyes carried determination as he tightened his grip on the umbrella and muttered again, "Know your place." Then, as though snapping himself back into his own persona, he corrected himself. With conviction, he declared his identity. "I'm the Venom Fox." The scene shifts to the Yuna merchant group. Inside, the protagonist's younger brother, Yeon, stood waiting. When he finally saw his brother emerge, he was stunned. The protagonist opened the door and stepped out, his body covered in blood. Wei froze for a moment before speaking, his voice uncertain, asking where his brother had been. The protagonist casually brushed off the concern, saying he had only been out for a drink. Then, turning the question back, he asked what brought Wei to his room. Wei, still unsettled by the sight of blood, admitted he had come to ask something but couldn't ignore the state his brother was in. The protagonist reassured him, explaining calmly that the blood was not his own. Though shocked at first, Wei quickly pieced it together, acknowledging that it was clear the blood didn't belong to his brother. Shifting focus, he spoke with some excitement. The elixirs they had received recently, he explained, seemed to be working with great effectiveness. He had been considering preparing a gift in return, something to express gratitude to the ones who had provided such precious medicine. His thoughts, he added, had turned toward Merchant Taeho of the Taeho Merchant Group. At that moment, the protagonist silently recalled the Taeho Merchant Group, the very people who had provided the azurite essence. Even their father had been curious about its true value. As he wiped the blood from his face with a cloth, the protagonist admitted that even he could not easily measure its worth. One, startled by the weight of those words, asked if it was truly that valuable. If so, then what could they possibly offer in return? The protagonist replied that money or goods would not be appropriate. The gift they had received was priceless. Confused, Wei pressed further, asking what should be done instead. Without hesitation, the protagonist answered, they should form a merchant's alliance. The suggestion left Wei shocked. A merchant's alliance? He quickly pointed out that while great merchant groups like Taeho had contributed elixirs, smaller groups had as well, such as the West Wind Escort Establishment, which lacked even its own defense force. If an alliance were to form, and protection was offered to everyone, it could indeed serve as repayment. But wasn't such a plan far too ambitious? The protagonist calmly reassured him there was no need to begin with something grand. They could start small, first with the Taeho Merchant Group and the West Wind Escort Establishment. With confidence, he added that since they had received something money could never repay, they must answer in kind with something greater, an alliance built on protection and strength. Wei, still uncertain, raised another question. What about the rules or membership fees? Shouldn't an alliance have structure? The protagonist answered that the rules should remain simple, just as their ancestors had once done. For the time being, there would be no membership fees. When Wei pressed further, asking what the true purpose of the alliance would be, his brother paused. Memories surfaced, merchants thanking him after he had dealt with the Ouyang clan and the Little Deity sect, saying that since then, troublemakers on the streets had decreased. He also recalled Wei's words from the past, urging him to one day protect their own escort establishment when he became stronger. With that thought, the protagonist spoke clearly. The alliance would exist to protect the lives of merchants. He explained further, suggesting the establishment of a system for quick communication, so that problems could be addressed without delay. Wei admitted it was a sound idea, but raised another concern. What if the situation was beyond the ability of even the Taeho Merchant Group's escort warriors to handle? The protagonist, recalling everything that had occurred in recent days, considered it carefully. If such a problem arose for a group as large as Taeho, it would likely mean martial arts factions were involved, possibly even those from the darker corners of the Jianghu. In that case, he declared with certainty, he would step in personally. Shocked, Wei asked if he truly meant to involve himself directly. The protagonist explained that the medicine they had received was priceless, and it had indeed granted him tremendous strength. When Wei asked if it truly made him stronger, he simply replied yes. At that, Wei leapt up in excitement, fully convinced. Determined, he asked what they should name the alliance. He proposed calling it the Great Merchants Alliance. His brother, however, looked disappointed. With a gloomy expression, he corrected him, better to call it the Great Merchants Association. The word alliance, he admitted, bothered him. Wei, smiling gently, accepted his brother's choice and promised to prepare everything accordingly. As he turned to leave the room, he paused briefly, remarking that since his brother's return, his own workload had only increased, leaving him swamped with responsibilities. The protagonist offered an awkward apology, but Wei brushed it off with a smile, saying that for merchants, the busier they were, the better it was. The protagonist returned his smile. Just then, a voice rang out from outside the room, calling for young Master Jinian and the chief administrator. The door burst open, and their companions stepped inside, flustered, exclaiming that they were finished. After hearing the urgent shout, the protagonist's brother asked for clarification, wanting to know what exactly had been done. The response came back with tears and fear, explaining that they were doomed because Lord Ouyang himself had arrived, accompanied by his disciples. The protagonist's brother was instantly struck with shock. Sweat ran down his face as he processed the news, unable to believe that such a formidable figure had truly come. The scene then shifted to the Yuna merchant group's main hall. Sitting calmly while sipping tea was none other than Ouyang Seng, the patriarch of the Ouyang clan. As he drank, his mind drifted back to past events, and with visible frustration, he thought of the humiliation his clan had suffered during the ruler's meeting. Just recalling the disgrace made his blood boil. Determined to restore his clan's pride, he turned to the three men seated before him. He declared that each of them must face Jin Eon of Yunha, trading in combat. He emphasized that one victory alone would not be enough to regain their lost honor. His expression hardened as he made his intent clear. Jin Eon must not be allowed an easy death. Instead, his suffering would serve as repayment for their humiliation. The three men acknowledged his orders with unwavering voices, fully committing themselves to the task. One of them then raised a practical question, asking whether the others planned to use weapons. He himself stated that it did not matter, since he always fought barehanded. This man was Shin Sobik, the Ouyang clan's in-law. Another spoke up, saying that he too preferred not to use weapons, as striking with fists felt more natural and satisfying. This was Ouyang Mayong, the clan's second son, known as a skilled swordsman. Finally, the third joined the discussion. This was Ouyang Woon, the clan's third son and a bladesman. He admitted with honesty that he lacked confidence and would prefer to rely on his blade instead. Ouyang Seng, displeased, immediately challenged his words. He questioned why Woon felt uncertain when the opponent was only a merchant's son. But Woon quickly defended his hesitation, pointing out that Jin Eon had already defeated Ouyang Hu. Although who had only been a distant relative, he was still a man with solid experience in the Jianghu, and his loss had proven Jin Eon was far from ordinary. The patriarch dismissed this reasoning with irritation. To him, whose defeat had nothing to do with experience, it was simply a matter of lacking true skill. At that moment, a servant approached carrying tea, but Ouyang Seng waved for the chatter to end. He commanded that Jin Eon be brought out immediately, ready to settle the matter. However, as he looked more closely at the person bringing the tea, his eyes widened in recognition. It was not an ordinary servant. It was the twins, the trusted bodyguards of Jin Eon, standing before him in disguise. The twins stepped forward and conveyed a message to Ouyang Seng. They explained that their young master had invited him to the annex and would meet with him once he finished his meal. The patriarch stared at the twins in silence, startled by their towering figures. Inwardly, he wondered why mere servants looked so large and intimidating. A short while later, the twins escorted Ouyang Seng along with his sons and in-law. Together, the group made their way toward the annex where Jin Eon awaited them. Upon arrival, the twins stepped ahead and announced that they had brought the guests. Jin Eon welcomed them calmly, standing with a composed and confident expression. He acknowledged their long journey, showing courtesy despite the tense circumstances. In response, the three younger men bowed respectfully. They each introduced themselves, Ouyang Mayong, Ouyang Woon, and Shin Sobik. Jin Eon received their greetings with a gentle smile, remarking that he had not expected Patriarch Ouyang himself to appear in person. The old patriarch returned the gesture with politeness, admitting that his visit was unannounced. He explained that he had come because he wished to see Jin Eon's strength with his own eyes. Jin Eon, standing firm and unwavering, understood their intent. He stated plainly that they had come for a duel, and with confidence, told them to decide the format of the match. Ouyang Seng explained that his sons wanted to learn through this contest, and he requested permission to proceed. The rules were simple. If someone left the ring, fell unconscious, or became unable to move, it would be considered defeat. Jin Eon closed his eyes briefly, then nodded with a faint smile. The clarity of the rules pleased him. The duel began with Ouyang Mayong stepping forward, confidence written on his face. Both men squared off against one another. From the sidelines, Ouyang Seng's thoughts simmered with expectation. He anticipated the moment when the merchant's son would be reduced to begging for his life. Yet Ouyang Mayong himself began to feel uneasy. Standing across from Jinian, he sensed something unusual. The young master of Yunhe did not feel like a mere merchant's son at all. Instead, he gave the impression of a warrior seasoned by the harsh life of the Jianghu. Doubts crept into Mayong's mind. Perhaps Jinian's victory over Ouyang, who had not been a fluke after all. Jinian slowly raised his hand, inviting his opponent to draw his weapon. But Mayong bristled at the suggestion, insisting that he would fight on his own terms. Before he could finish speaking, however, Jinian suddenly moved. His speed was overwhelming. With a single strike to the face, he sent Mayong hurtling backward, crashing violently into the wall. The spectators gasped in disbelief. Even Ouyang Sing, caught off guard, spilled his tea as his hands trembled. Jinian stood over the defeated opponent, calm and steady. His words carried a sharp edge of confidence as he remarked that Mayong should have drawn his sword. Then, turning his eyes toward the next challenger, he called for the fight to continue.